out myself and my family just to show that I'm serious about this.
It's one of the, it is so deceptive when if you're hanging out here today, it seems calm, and then all of a sudden it can change on a dime.
The calm before the storm. Right. Yeah, and if you're from Florida or live anywhere with hurricanes, you know what's coming, and this is a very serious one.
Right. In terms of the aftermath, for police, if there are 911 calls during the storm, obviously it can be too dangerous for police, for firefighters, for EMS, or anybody to go out. You got to wait. What are the priorities? Because in many cases, you got to get the roads clear before you can even get anywhere.
Right, we work with fire and EMS, and we have an emergency response team with chainsaws and stuff like that, and we prioritize all the calls. So we still take the calls, we prioritize them, and we'll, as soon as it's safe for our guys to go out there, we go by the highest priority, and we work our way there. Obviously, our hospitals, our shelters, our main importance is to clear the areas around there so we can use those facilities.
So to people who are listening right now, whether they're considering going to a shelter or just staying at home or trying to figure out what to do in the next couple hours, what's your message?
My message is, if you're going to stay there, please hunker down. Please call us. We'll get to you as soon as we can. But understand that we're no good if I can't get there, if my people can't get there. So just pray or do whatever it is you do to just stay safe, and we'll be there for you at the outcome. We have a lot of plans in place for what happens after the storm.
Captain, I appreciate all your efforts. Thank you very much. Appreciate it. Yeah, good luck to you. A lot more to cover here in Fort Myers. Also, John Berman in Miami. And, of course, all our correspondents all around. We'll be right back. And what time is the next update in terms of the track? Is it 5 p.m.? Because the one, obviously at 11, we got new numbers on storm surge, which were frankly alarming for areas along the west all the way up into Tampa.
Yeah. At this point, the Hurricane Center can put out a new track anytime that it wants to. It's up to them. If they see a wobble or a wiggle and it makes a difference, they can change everything in a discussion, in an email, honestly. Right now, the next forecast change will be 5 p.m.
We'll be watching, obviously, for...
Where we're going, there you go. All right. Steve and Julie, good to see you guys.
Yes. What better people to go to, I guess.
Absolutely. Nice to see you too, Jen. And yeah, we'll be obviously watching this very closely for the next couple of days. We'll be here with you night and day to help talk with you and through this system as it continues to move toward the Bay Area. We've been watching it, Julie, and it looks like, especially on radar, this is an important point to make, as I learned with several hurricanes, is that when you actually get land-based radar to actually observe it, you can notice those changes a little bit better. Satellite is awesome and it's excellent, but when you actually can use radar, as we're using Key West Doppler radar to actually see this storm, we can actually see it just a little bit clearer. So we did notice maybe just a little bit more of a northwesterly turn, and we've been waiting for that turn around the western side, haven't we?
Absolutely. We've been waiting for that for days now because, of course, that northerly turn is going to depend upon where that track moves up the state of Florida. So we've been watching that eye right along the northern coast of Cuba, and you can see probably within the last hour or so, we noticed that little bit of a northern jog. Still has that westerly component, so not moving north yet, but moving a little bit northwesterly, it looks like. As of the official 2 p.m. update from the National Hurricane Center, though, this is moving west at about 9 miles per hour, pressure 941 millibars, and maximum wind sustained at 125 miles per hour. And that's been due to some interaction with Cuba, has weakened the storm since yesterday. And the latest track that came out, we'll show you that. You can see expected to intensify a bit as we head towards tomorrow, and this storm potentially makes its landfall in the Keys.
It's moving across the Keys, and they've ordered evacuations there, and we've heard local officials say there, media saying it's like, this may not be a survivable situation down in parts of the Keys with the type of storm surge they've seen. With Wilma in 2005, the storm passed 75 miles to the north, and it actually flooded a lot of Key West as it passed. The storm, I think, was a Category 2 or 3 at that point. So that just gives you the idea of the kind of inundation and the susceptibility to the low levels that they have in the Keys for areas to flood. So this will be pretty brutal, especially on the eastern side, but also with that counterclockwise motion. It could also push, if there is an island, depending on where the landfall takes place, you might even see kind of a northern surge with the stronger winds coming back from the north, pushing to the south around the western side of the system.
Yeah, definitely a very serious threat setting up for the Keys. And then the system, while on the current track, continues to make its way to the northwest, maintaining strength. You know, it's going to be moving over warm Gulf waters at this point. Not a lot of shear it's going to be facing at that point. We're expecting it to still be a Category 4 storm And the latest track that came in at 11 a.m. had this storm approaching maybe near the Fort Myers area, but it's still not exact. Some folks have been asking, could it shift a little? And of course it could, because it depends on the northerly turn. You notice the cone gets more narrow, though, as we get closer to the event. So it looks like at this point we're looking at potentially another landfall in southwest Florida near Fort Myers.
And we've been saying this for several days, that this track will shift. We've been saying every time we show you the track, because it's going to change, this will change, and this may change. And however it changes, as we've learned throughout the week, can affect the Bay Area and different parts of the Bay Area in different ways. The eastern side is typically the stronger wind part of the storm because it's the advancing part. But as it gets farther west, that's when we start to get concerned about water issues. And in particular down in Charlotte Harbor there, southward facing areas where we get this surge of water. They're talking about a storm surge over 10 feet in some of these areas. And as we move up the coast and the storm is maintain some strength, and you've seen over the past couple of days, you see that Monday position there at 8 a.m. with 115-mile-per-hour winds. Well, that was 2 days ago, the Hurricane Center had forecast a tropical storm in that location. And that's because conditions change and forecasts change. We understand that. But that's what we're telling you about. Things can change with the storm over time, and with the winds coming northwest and then west around the center of the storm toward the coastal areas into rivers, bays, inland areas, that can slow even the high tides trying to come back out again. And that's where you have the flood. And we'll show you the graphic about the high tides to give you a rough idea. But you really have to watch those high tides, especially on Monday. Of course, the concern before that would be wind primarily and some coastal flooding, but wind primarily, and especially in areas just east of the center of the storm where it's actually going to pass. And right now we have the rough area where the center part of it would pass in this forecast, and that can change, as we always say. The eastern side, we're talking about Polk County, sections of Hillsborough County, and we're talking about gusts when we're in the category 3 range of 100 miles per hour, even plus in some areas. Certainly hurricane force, which is above 70, say 5 miles per hour. And that can be quite scary, dangerous, and destructive, but you add to that additional winds, and that can be very destructive.
And, you know, the exact impacts will depend on, again, as the exact track gets narrowed down. We have a pretty good idea right now, but you'll notice our spaghetti models in pretty good agreement. At this point, as of today, we're expecting it to roll through near the Fort Myers area and then continue that turn north and moving right through the Tampa Bay area, kind of right through the heart of us is where most of the models are aligned at this point. Now, we know these models can change, of course, over the course of days, but at this point, they are in agreement with that. And we've been seeing that shift, you know, a couple of days ago, it really looked like it was almost going to move up the East Coast. Even now it's
Fort Myers, Florida, where it has been deceptively calm in terms of the weather throughout the day. We've got a little bit of gust of winds just in the last few minutes, but really nothing serious, nothing to really indicate the monster storm, the deadly storm that is to come. And the people here in Fort Myers woke up today realizing that because the storm had shifted to the west. They're talking about storm surge down in Naples, which isn't too far from here, Saftey here, in the 10 to 15 feet range in the Centennial Park area where we are right now. If it raises 10 feet, this area is going to be flooded. 15 feet, there's no telling how much of this area will be flooded. This is actually evacuation zone B, they call it. Evacuation zone A, there was already a mandatory evacuation for. Then earlier today, they also called out a mandatory evacuation for this area. B basically stretches south of here and also west across the river. So it's a really big area. They've been sending out police with loudspeakers saying, look, this is now a mandatory evacuation zone, trying to get as many people as possible in the shelters. Because frankly, there's a lot of people who have just thought, look, you know, it's Miami. This is going to be an East Coast storm. It's Miami that's going to get the worst of this. It is a whole different story right now as we continue to track where this storm is exactly. I want to check in with Brian Todd, who's in West Palm Beach. Brian, it looks like it's not going to be as bad there as it might have been. I'm wondering what you're hearing from people and what you're seeing.
Well, Anderson, the streets have gotten a lot more deserted here because the wind has started to kick up. We were told by our weather people at CNN that we could expect tropical storm force winds about now. We're starting to experience those. Whitecaps here on the Intercoastal Waterway. Storm surge is a concern because it could lap up and wash through this area and inundate it with water if the storm surge plus the high tide combine with each other. Less than an hour ago, they ratcheted up those warnings that you were talking about, going door to door with loudspeakers. They ratcheted up that pressure on people to stay inside. Less than an hour ago, a curfew went into effect. They do not want to see people out here on these streets. Once in a while, an odd vehicle will pass by, but we're not seeing much traffic or many people out on the streets now. People seem to be abiding by that curfew. Now, we talk about the danger of cranes. We've got a double whammy here because we've got two cranes here. This one is bracketed down about halfway up. That bracket up there is securing it. But there's another one over here, just to my left. I'm going to walk a little bit over here. This is a large construction site, looks like it's a condominium being built here. That one is also bracketed down about halfway up. And as we've been talking about all day here and in Miami, these top booms of these cranes are going to be allowed to swing. And it's going to look pretty ominous when they're allowed to swing, but they're designed to do that. We had a lady, though, just come and tell us that who lives in that apartment building over there, she's concerned that crane may topple and hit her apartment building. We've got apartment buildings over here and a church over here. If these cranes come down, those places could be vulnerable. Anderson?
Yeah, Brian, I know in Miami, certainly we saw, they were securing those cranes as much as they could. But as you said, they allow the outer arm of that crane to basically act like a weather vane. That's actually safer. We'll obviously continue to watch all the construction sites, but Brian, in West Palm Beach, as elsewhere in Florida, building codes have changed in the wake of Andrew, as people probably know by now. So newer structures are built much more solidly, supposed to be able to withstand strong storms.
That's right, they are, and they're built to code here. Andrew was the storm that really changed that equation all throughout South Florida, Anderson, as you know. All of these buildings are built to code. However, we were looking at one hotel not far from here, and those people told us that they were built only to withstand a Category 2. So not everybody is building to withstand a 4, despite what you may think about, certain standards here. However, a lot of these buildings seem very solid and secure. But when you've got 130 mile per hour winds, possibly here, it might be not quite as strong, but they're going to threaten some structures. They're going to rip whole sections of roof off other structures, probably. So those are things you have to watch out for. This construction site is kind of that in a microcosm. Look at all the loose stuff that's here. Now, they've secured a lot of this, but a lot of this could be flying around tomorrow. So it's the flying debris, Anderson, at the height of these storms that is very, very dangerous. Not as dangerous as you've heard Chad and Allison and our other weather people say that the flooding is, because that is the thing that kills the most people. But flying debris, flying shingles and flying sections of rooftops, that's going to be a big concern, in addition to these babies right behind me, these cranes.
Yeah, I mean, it's one of the reasons people need to stay indoors, not just because of the surge and the floodwaters and the chance of drowning, but again, those projectiles, when it is dark out and that wind is whipping, I've been out there as where you have and so many others, you don't know what's coming. You can't see what's coming towards you until often it's too late. We're going to continue to check in with Brian. We're going to take a short break as our coverage from Florida, from all points in southern Florida and beyond, continues.
The exact opposite, and a lot of folks are wondering what caused that. And again, it's all due to this area of high pressure out to the east of us.
That big ridge that extends out into the Atlantic and kind of the western edge of it kind of nudges back toward the state of Florida. And we're also watching the trough to the north as well, a low pressure trough. And what the storm is doing is looking for that weakness around the western side. How strong is it? How weak is it? The weaker it is, the quicker that it would turn to the north. But in this case, as we've seen, that ridge was perhaps a little bit stronger than the computer models thought. And that's why the track has slowly shifted west. But if you think about it, we were talking about this 4 or 5 days out, and the track was across the state, and it's still across the state. So they've been fairly consistent within, say, within 100 miles. But, within 2 days out, the historical average for an error is 90 miles. 90 miles.
Right.
So when you look at these tracks, know that there's still a lot of error. These tracks are not perfect, these forecast tracks, these computer models. So that's what's the difficult part, is living with the uncertainty of that track. But this is the current track, and these are the effects.
And you can see then kind of takes a turn north and then kind of very quickly loses its intensity as it heads into the southeast, kind of in the long term. And of course, hurricane warnings have been posted for the entire Tampa Bay area. At this point, we are pretty certain that every county in the Tampa Bay area is going to feel those hurricane force winds. They're going to see the heavy rain from this. And, also have the threat of isolated tornadoes as this storm.
In southern Florida and beyond.
The exact opposite. And a lot of folks are wondering what caused that. And again,
Right,
it's
so
all due to
right
this area of high
there
pressure out
is
to
where
the east
I'm
of us.
located.
Ridge that extends out
And it's
into
going to
Atlantic
go
and kind of the western
straight
edge of it,
that
kind of
way.
nudges back toward the state
We're
of
going to be
Florida.
getting half of
And we're
that.
also watching the trough to the north as well. well, a low pressure trough. And what the storm is doing is looking for that weakness around the western side. How strong is it? How weak is it? The weaker it is, the quicker that it would turn to the north. But in this case, as we've seen, that ridge was perhaps a little bit stronger than the computer models thought. And that's why the track has slowly shifted west. But if you think about it,
is when does it finally start to make that really sharp turn to the north? We focus on the maximum wind gusts. Notice for the most part, it's the western half of Florida where we have our strongest winds. Key West, this will be our peak maximum wind gusts around 138 miles per hour. But say up around Fort Myers, 136, even Tampa going to be in the triple digits, right around 116 miles per hour. The track itself will still take it over portions of the Keys and then riding up along the western coast, making it very close call towards Naples, Fort Myers, even into Tampa. So those are going to be the cities of concern going forward in about the next 36 to 48 hours. Here's a look at the forecast radar. So this shows you not just where it's headed, but where some of the heavy rain is going to be as well. When we get to Sunday morning, this is when we really start to see incredibly heavy downpours for cities like Miami, into Fort Myers. Then we push into Sunday afternoon and evening. Now Tampa starting to get some incredibly heavy rainfall. And then the system itself begins to make its way into portions of Georgia and also into South Carolina. Overall rainfall totals, we're talking widespread 6 to 10 inches of rain, but it could even be slightly higher than that, and especially when you get some of those outer bands where you could end up getting incredibly heavy downpours for several hours at a time. But the rain spreads even farther north, so even states like Alabama, Georgia, and South Carolina could end up picking up, say, 4 to 6 inches of rain. We've noticed the hurricane watches and warnings continue to spread to the north. Hurricane warnings now extending from the northernmost part all the way down to the entire state. And we now have tropical storm watches in effect for portions of South Carolina as well as Georgia. Anderson?
You know, you talk about that turn. Any way to estimate when that turn north might occur? Because obviously, you know, there are tens of thousands of people watching that very closely because it's going to affect exactly where this thing goes.
Right. Likely it will happen within the next 6 to 12 hours, but you also have to keep in mind that's getting awfully close to when we expect it to cross over the Florida Keys. You've got a couple of things driving it. You've got a high pressure system sitting out here over the open Atlantic. You've got a high pressure sitting right around the Texas coastline. Those two combinations are what's going to be driving it to push that right-hand turn over the main peninsula of Florida. Then you also have that high that's over the main portion of the U.S. that's going to break away. That's what's going to allow the storm, once it crosses into places like Georgia and Tennessee, and take its track from there. But ultimately, Anderson, again, 6 hours versus 12. We know it's likely going to happen in that time period. But if it happens 6 versus 12, there's a huge difference there on who actually will end up taking the ultimate.
Oh, where'd it go? I think
Difference there on who actually will end up taking the ultimate landfall. So again, what we have. A range
here. The new models constraint. The pressure.
I think it's them. I don't think it's my internet.
Is still lower than the pressure of Harvey. And that's what we saw in Texas, of course. We talk about the storm paralleling the coast of West Coast Florida and how the East Coast is in bigger trouble. But you know what? This is the bad side of the storm. We call that the dirty side of the storm. We have to add the movement of the storm with the wind field. And so as the winds pour onshore here, you're not out of the woods by any means. Ocala, Leesburg, all the way up the East Coast from Port Jupiter to anywhere to Daytona Beach, all the way down south into Miami, because you're on the wrong side. You're on the bad side of the storm, also causing significant storm surge. Now, let me just use a different term. Flooding. Do you get that? Storm surge is water that will kill you. It is water that is 8 to 12 feet above sea level, and your house, if you live near the ocean, is not. That's what storm surge is. It is the push of the water, the pull of the water by the low and the difference in pressure, and sure that water will get into the Everglades, it will get to you, Naples, and it will get to you, Fort Myers. And yes, we are concerned about your storm surge because the fatalities in water are greater than the fatalities in wind. Dr. Michael Brennan from the National Hurricane Center joins me now.
And welcome back to our continuing coverage. I want to go to John Berman in Miami. John, I understand one of those outer bands of the storm is now hitting you.
That's right, Anderson. A sign of what you are in for, maybe even stronger and maybe very soon. One of those outer bands from Hurricane Irma hitting Miami right now. The wind has been very consistent, blowing at 30 miles an hour, 35 maybe higher for some time now, but now we're getting the rain in combination with that. It comes and goes, but when it's on, you know, it is very strong. That is why people here, officials here, really want everyone inside. It's time to be indoors. Once the bands start hitting, it is time to stop moving about, get where you're going to be for some time. And behind me in Miami Beach, that means a total curfew as of 8 o'clock tonight. They don't want anyone on the streets out after 8 o'clock tonight, and if you are there, and taken into custody. They are just that serious right now. As I said, one of the outer bands hitting us right now. So let's go to Allison Sinjar in the CNN Weather Center to get a sense of where the storm is and why we're beginning to feel this right here in Miami. Allison?
That's right. So one of the things that has just changed at the top of the hour is the forward movement, the direction in which the storm is moving. Right now, we're starting to see a change from due west to west-northwest. That may seem very subtle, but that's what we've been waiting for. We've been waiting for that shift in which it is going to start to make that northward trek towards the state of Florida. And we're starting to at least get a little bit of a glimpse of that. Again, it's not a sharp turn, at least as of this point, but we're starting to see that change over. Now, one of the main concerns with this storm is still going to be incredibly strong winds. At landfall point, for a lot of these areas, these are your maximum wind gusts you're going to be dealing. 138 miles per hour in Key West, 136 in Fort Myers. Even Tampa going to be looking at 116 miles per hour at its strongest point for the storm. The track still does take it along the west coast, but it's likely going to make its first landfall, if you will, in the U.S. over the Florida Keys. Exactly where, that is still yet to be determined. We have to wait to find out how quickly the storm makes that sharp turn to the north to really be able to tell exactly where the storm is going to go. It's then likely to go along places like Naples, Fort Myers, into Tampa, and then eventually it will move all inland and then push towards the states like Georgia, Alabama, and into Tennessee. One of the key things that we expect for this storm is that it will re-intensify back to a Category 4 storm. The main reason for that, take a look at how warm the water is in this region, upper 80s. That is the perfect fuel for a storm like this to be able to intensify, and that's what we expect it to do before it finally makes landfall. Now, we've been hearing a lot of this. People want to know, what is the timing for a lot of these cities in Florida? So let's take a look at Tampa, for example. Tropical storm winds will have already arrived in some of these areas by tomorrow afternoon. Hurricane force winds will likely already be in Tampa by tomorrow evening. Rainfall could be looking at 6 to 8 inches of rain, and the storm surge around 5 to 8 feet. Now we move to Naples, a little bit farther south of Tampa. Tropical storm winds will arrive early tomorrow morning. Hurricane force winds could arrive, say, just shortly after sunrise on Sunday. Then we talk about rainfall. This is where we could be looking at really heavy amounts of rain. We're talking nearing a foot of rain, and some of the areas just outside of Naples could pick up, say, as much as 15 inches of rain. Storm surge is also going to be a big factor, 10 to 15 feet for this region. Here's a look at the radar going forward to show you not just the direction, but also where those heavy rain bands are going to be. Again, on Sunday, we expect it early morning to cross over the Keys, then continue its trek up the west coast. We're talking Naples, Fort Myers, into Tampa, then pushing up towards Jacksonville and into the state of Georgia. It's still going to take incredibly strong winds into places like South Carolina and Georgia. those states also have tropical storm watches. Even though we expect the storm to actually weaken a bit before it makes it into those areas, it's not going to weaken entirely. They are still going to get some impacts. Miami is already starting to see some of those impacts as we speak, and hurricane force winds, guys, will be arriving as early as tomorrow morning.
Allison Chinchard, thank you so much. Indeed, Miami is starting to feel some of those impacts, as Allison's saying, the storm starting to make that turn towards Florida. So what we're seeing here now with these higher winds and the rain starting to come, it's on. I mean, this is what we can expect to see for some time. And by the way, this is nothing compared to what it will be as this storm Miami and then up the west coast of Florida. Griffin right now, he's up in these shelters where people have just been coming in by droves for safety once they heard that Fort Myers was really in the bullseye. Drew.
That's right, and the big news here is the line is gone. They said everybody would fit. Everybody is fitting. That entire line, John, that's sprung all the way around this building and into the parking lot 2 and 3 times, has now diminished. These are people who are inside. They are coming back out with their armbands, getting their stuff. They're taking care of a big situation with the dogs. The dog situation out here is not good. You have all these dogs in this area, and they're trying to figure out the owners and the dogs, how they fit into a shelter with several thousands of people. But just as the rain really started to fall here heavy, they had a big push to get everybody finally inside. And so this shelter, which can hold 8,000, still has room for more, has everybody now inside. Really good news. We've been watching this all day, John, wondering how they were going to get people in. They finally did it. This shelter is now ready to brace for Hurricane Irma. John?
So there is room for more in that shelter, Drew. And as we know, Fort Myers maybe got a little bit of a later start with people heading to shelters and getting to safety, because it wasn't as clear until overnight that the impact was going to be felt so strongly there. Do you get the sense that most people who are going to move have done so already? Are there still people heading to shelters, and how much more time do they have?
Really, the time has passed. There is capacity for people who want to come in last minute, who maybe have second thoughts, but you have to get here on your own. The bus service, the emergency bus service, which was taking evacuees to shelters, stopped at 3 o'clock. Fort Myers was interesting. There was evacuations going on of the barrier islands of the level or zone A flood zones or surge zones, but this morning is when officials in Collier and Lee County extended that zone to Zone B. And that had a lot more people looking carefully at where they were, where this hurricane is, and what the path could be. And that's when a lot of people made the decision to finally, listen, I'm going to go to a shelter. It created a big log jam. It was sort of a last minute decision, but a decision that really required the information that people did not get until this morning. So that's where that decision came from, and that's what created a lot of consternation. But, you know, the county, the state, the police here, they've done a great job. They stood up, kept everybody calm, really minor problems, a lot of inconvenience, but everybody right now is inside at this huge shelter. John.
And that's great news. Drew Griffin in Fort Myers, people inside that shelter now where there is still room. So if you're listening, there is still time to get there, and there will be space for you. Drew Griffin, thank you so much. Fantastic, important work at that shelter all morning and all afternoon long. Let's go over to Anderson now, who's also in Fort Myers. Anderson?
Yeah, John, a little bit of rain starting, really the first rain we've started to see here over the last several hours. But again, it's really not much, just enough to kind of get the people who were kind of walking around, get them scurrying for cover. But again, just a small taste of what is to come. I should point out, just in terms of people here in the Fort Myers area getting to a shelter, the buses stopped running to shelters at 3 o'clock. The city said they did that to allow the bus drivers to help take care of their own families to get home and deal with what they need to get to. So if somebody is thinking of still going to a shelter, though there may still be room, the difficulty for some is how to get there. Of course, police say they will try to help if you call 211, but again, that number has been inundated with calls all throughout the day. I want to check in with Miguel Marquez, who's in Punta Gorda, Florida. Miguel, I understand you've been looking at the shelter situation there. How is it?
It is filled to capacity. They have 3 shelters here in Charlotte County where Punta Gorda is. All 3 are filled to capacity. 2 were for anyone. The 3rd was a special needs shelter. So what they are doing now, says the public information officer for the county, they've established 5 shelters in Sarasota County, about a 20-25 minute drive from here, where residents of Charlotte County can go to shelter. They are all packed here. I want to show you a little bit about this one. This is at an elementary school here in Port Charlotte in Charlotte County. I'd like to talk to this gentleman. Owen Jones, is it?
Yeah.
Oh, how are you, sir?
Not too bad today.
What brings you here? When did you come here and why?
I came here just this morning about 8:30. About 8:30.
And who did you come with?
Well, I came here, and my family are here. My wife is here, and my son and his family are here.
And the check-in process was fine? You're comfortable? You believe that you will be fine here?
Yes. Yes, I'll be fine here.
How are your family doing? Are they okay?
They're okay. They're
rooting for the storm, I take it.
Yes, well, we are gearing up for the hurricane.
The hurricane is on everyone's mind here. When you go to service stations now to try to get gas in this area, you know those zombie movies that they have everywhere? It is literally like the zombie apocalypse. They see a car or 2 pulled up to the gas station. Everybody stops and pulls up. There's no gas. Everyone's talking amongst themselves sort of nervously. It is a very, very bizarre scene right here in this part of Florida right now. There is no gas to be had. Almost every store is shut. Everybody is either in shelters or figuring out what gas they have to get out of this area and get to another area. A few shelters in this particular county, is most of it is lowlands. They expect it to flood, and they just can't afford to put shelters in places that they would end up having to evacuate anyway. So they're sending them up to Sarasota. Anderson?
Miguel, as a fan of zombie films, thankfully zombies do not drive. But maybe they might evolve to that one day. But thankfully, as of now, they don't know how to use a car. It's very difficult. Miguel, thanks for that. We're going to continue to check in with you. Punta Gorda, a town that, of course, knows hurricanes all too well, as Charlie hit back in 2004. Really devastated that town. I want to go to Renee Marsh, who's in Washington, with the administrator of FEMA, Brock Long. Renee?
That's right, Anderson. I know that Administrator Long just got out of a meeting with the power companies, and you say you have a little reality check for people in the state of Florida, and it doesn't relate to power. Tell me what we're expecting.
Yeah, Renee, because of the trajectory from south to north, and the fact that they're forecasting it to be a Category 4 hurricane, the maximum radius winds and the hurricane force winds that extend to the northeast side of the eye are going to pass right through the state based on this forecast, which is, going to take a lot of the power infrastructure out. And so we could see millions of people without power in Florida for multiple days, and in some areas, maybe weeks. And so I think it's very important to set the expectations of citizens. This is why we ask and plead with people to be ready for multiple days. And unfortunately, this is coming into reality.
And when you say millions, I mean, what are we talking about here? 6 million, 7 million people without power?
It's hard to speculate, but some of the estimates could be 5 million people without power based on this, south to north trajectory. And it's not just Florida. It's going to be moving into Georgia as well. Over the next 5 days.
I mean, when you compare that to Harvey was what, 300,000 people?
Right. So completely different storm. Harvey was a stalled rain event that stalled out, lost its steering current, sat over Texas for 5 days, dropped copious amounts of rain. This is, we're working with our private sector partners in the energy sectors. They are, pre-positioning, pulling out all stops. They're going to be activating mutual aid from all over the country to be able to come in. And as soon as we can get the roadways open, and we'll work with our state partners, Governor Scott and Florida Division of Emergency Management, to try to get in and restore, power as quickly as we can. But people have to understand that we can't just make the lights flip back on and it takes a concerted effort from the local governments all the way up.
So what I'm hearing you say is we're talking about as upwards of 5 million, 6 million possibly people without power for weeks at a time. Talk about the health aspects. I mean, there are a lot of elderly people in the state of Florida, and we're talking about no power. I mean, what will be the situation for those?
So my job as the coordinator of FEMA is basically to coordinate a unified effort across the federal government. And that's what you see behind us. So part of the effort here, we have HHS in the room. We have what's called Emergency Support Function 8 that is directly working with Governor Scott and his team to identify any health and medical issues that are there. We've already been pre-positioning teams to go in and trying to support their needs to meet those demands. You're exactly right. We also have an Office of Disability Coordination that works with functional and access needs and trying to meet the needs and provide a standard of care for all citizens that they deserve.
I want to talk about the storm overall. What are you seeing now? I mean, I spoke to you earlier this morning. Now we're hours later. The storm is closer to the United States. Give me a big picture, bird's eye view of the operation here and what your biggest concern is right now.
Well, right now, unfortunately, people in the Keys, anybody that stayed behind, the time to evacuate is basically running out. A lot of people in Southwest Florida and Southern Florida, should be making their final preparations and getting into the shelters or getting to a safe location that can withstand the winds out of the storm surge area into a facility that can handle the forecasted winds, for that area. And the bottom line is it starts to encroach. We start to, estimate and understand where our resources are going to be needed to support Governor Scott's response and recovery missions, and we'll stand by to be able to support as information comes in.
So are you shifting resources in real time right now? I mean, as this storm now continues to inch towards the west?
Most of the commodities, life-sustaining commodities like food and water have already been pre-staged. Now we are also working with disaster medical teams and power crews to be able to pre-stage them. But the problem with this is that you can't move everything in and expose it to the storm or to the system. So there's going to be a time lapse there. We have to wait for the system to get out. We have to be able to build not only pathways, through the infrastructure to get back in, but then we also are working with our DoD partners to establish airlift pathways as well for commodities and teams to get in as well, particularly to the South Florida area. Yeah.
Administrator Brock, thank you so much. I'm going to send it back to you, Anderson.
Renee, to hear about that number of people potentially without power for days and days, if not weeks. And again, as you importantly pointed out, a lot of elderly residents in Florida really are going to be affecting them. That's something we'll obviously be tracking a lot. A lot of folks are going to be in need throughout the state, and I think that's important to remember. As many people today have seen the storm shift to the west coast here, or around Fort Myers, below in Naples, even up to Tampa, where storm surge may be 5 to 8 feet, according to the latest modeling at 11 a.m. this morning. This is a statewide event, and in fact, a multi-state event. We're obviously going to continue to be covering for quite some time. We're going to take a short break, and we'll be back in a moment.
Thanks for joining me. I know you guys are busy down there. Talk us through the 8 a.m. update.
Sure. Well, you can see the eye of Irma here on the radar from Key West. Its eye skirting the north coast of Cuba. That interaction with land has brought the peak winds down a little bit, but I don't want people to focus on that because the hazards from Irma are just now arriving through the Florida Keys and South Florida. These outer rain bands are beginning to arrive, so conditions are deteriorating now, and we expect Irma to re-strengthen as it moves out over these very warm waters in the Florida Straits. It's going to have about 12 or maybe even 18 hours over the water before it reaches the Keys, and then perhaps even a little more time over water after it passes the Keys before it finally moves inland somewhere along the west coast of Florida during the late in the day on Sunday or Sunday night. So a very dangerous situation, particularly for the Keys and for the Florida west coast, all the way from the Tampa Bay area southward to Naples. They can see the core of the major hurricane. And as you were just talking about that life-threatening storm surge, the Gulf Coast of Florida is particularly sensitive to storm surge. It's very high inundation values that can extend quite a ways inland. So that's a big concern of ours today.
The topography of the water across southwest Florida, the bathymetry or underwater topography, is different on the southwest side and on the east side. Tell us about how that will affect surge even into the Everglades, Doctor.
Right, yes, the bathymetry and the coastal shelf on the Gulf side is very shallow. So as you walk out into the water, the water doesn't get deep very fast. So all that water that's being pushed by the hurricane, so as Irma might come up like this, the northwesterly winds on the back side of it are going to drive that water, and it piles up, and it can go really far inland here in the Naples area. It can go up these rivers and creeks near Fort Myers and up into the bays. So it can affect millions of people are at risk of life-threatening storm surge in these areas. There still is a significant storm surge risk on the southeast coast as well, particularly in Miami-Dade County along the west side of Biscayne Bay, and as well as in the Florida Keys. They're all at risk of this life-threatening surge event.
Let's shift our attention from Boca down to Miami and even to Homestead. What are the new updates for that as the storm has, let's say, shifted 20 miles to the west? What are your thought processes there?
Well, the surge threat is still there. We could still see 5 to 10 feet of inundation all the way from Boca down around the southwest southern tip of the peninsula. Now, on the East Coast, as you mentioned, the storm surge threat doesn't extend as far inland, especially in Palm Beach and Broward counties. But here in Miami-Dade, it goes inland a lot farther along Biscayne Bay. So there's lots of people at risk that have been asked to evacuate for storm surge. And that storm surge threat is going to creep northward along the coast of the Gulf Coast and the Atlantic coast of Florida as we go through Sunday and even into Monday.
I have not many seconds left. I am a little bit concerned, Doctor, that we flood the Everglades with 12 feet of water, and Miami, let's say West Kendall, can flood from the backside. Are you looking at that at all?
Yeah, I mean, there is the potential for that. That's generally for a slower moving storm that would be a biggest threat for that type of flooding. But there's going to be a lot of water with the storm. There's going to be a lot of rainfall. So there's going to be a lot of flooding problems just in general in the Florida Peninsula, either from storm surge and or the combination of very heavy rain. So everybody's going to want to keep an eye out for that.
Thank you, Doctor. Also, some displaced livestock, displaced wildlife. In particular, alligators that I'm a little bit worried about, but I don't like wildlife anyway. Doctor, thank you very much. We'll talk to you at 11 o'clock. People, this is the real deal. This truly is. If you are in Key West, you need to go. This could be a 140-mile-per-hour storm knocking down the entire city. I was married there. I love Key West. I love how it looks. But this is the real deal. Victor. Those are from the east, the wrong direction, blowing the water into Biscayne Bay and up the intercoastal. And our Victor Blackwell right there. But look, I want you to look at the blue. I want you to look at the blue area that I painted in here. This is what happens with a 6-foot storm surge through Miami. You say, well, it could be more than that. Sure, yes, it could. But let's just go 6 just to say that, because it's easy to put 2 meters in my computer here. Look at all of this. Look at all the downtown that is completely wet. The people that think they're going to ride it out in skyscrapers are going to have their elevator shafts completely wet, not being able to get up and down from their building and be cut off and likely probably have no power. And that's if you just get missed compared to where we're seeing right now, because really Miami is a slight miss as the storm is going to the west. As the storm has moved to the west in the overnight hours, we did see a slight shift to about Key West to Naples. And now Naples, you are really in the middle of what should be the eye wall in 24 to 36 hours. The eye wall is still over Cuba. It lost a lot of intensity overnight. The wind is now 130, but don't take your eye off the ball here. This is still a very big storm, and it's forecast to get back into warm water and likely get back up to a Category 5 before making landfall, pushing water over Cudjoe Key, Summerland Key, Big Pine Key, Key West itself, and then on up into the Florida Bay area, either Everglades City, possibly to Naples, or Cape Coral. That's the area that we're really watching here. Farther to the north, Tampa, you are now closer to the eye than you were yesterday, or the center. There may not be an eye by that time, but Orlando, you're going to pick up 100 to 115, and even toward Tampa, likely 95 to 100 miles per hour. Now, there are bigger buildings in Florida than you might expect, because they don't build on sand, they build on coral. They go down and they get some bedrock. And so there are many big buildings in Florida, and especially in Miami, 70 over 40 stories tall. If the wind is 145, then all of a sudden you're 174 or almost to 190. So let's reduce this because the storm is slightly farther away. If you're 100 miles an hour at the surface, you'd be 120, 30 stories up, and you'd be probably closer to 150, another almost category higher due to the fact that there's no friction up above and the wind blows any way that it wants to up there and blows through those buildings. Most of those windows are hurricane rated. What does that mean when the building's not finished? And there are so many buildings in the Miami area that still have towers, still have cranes, still have some windows in, some windows out. There you go, Key West. You are in 100 miles per hour or more. Naples, Fort Myers, Sarasota, same story. And even into Key West, from all the way to Key West to Tampa, could be still a hurricane, Cat 1 or Cat 2, all the way up into central or northern Florida. Winds in Atlanta, probably 60 or 70. Crazy storm.
All right, Chad Myers.
With the latest. Lonnie, good morning.
And good morning to you and good morning, everybody. You know, where Jeff Glore is located down there on Biscayne Bay, we just checked in on the stats. They've already had 1 foot. That's not much, but they've had 1 foot of storm surge, and this storm is miles away. Let me give you the latest information from the National Hurricane Center. This is the latest update that just came in moments ago. You're going to notice the wind speed has come down, and I can tell you why it came down. It was up at 155 miles per hour. It's now down to 130 mile per hour maximum wind. That's because it's interacting with the north shore of Cuba. We've had a landfall that wasn't anticipated, a little wobble to the south. That's what these things do. Okay, they wobble back and forth. It is forecast, though, to continue off to the northwest of 12 miles per hour. Right now, 225 miles from Miami, so we've got to get to the track. Has the track changed? Well, it still sees that big turn to the north. Very possible to see a landfall around the Florida Keys as a Cat 4. And again, right now at 130 miles per hour, that's barely a Cat 4. 129, you're into a Cat 3, but we believe the Florida Straits, that water is so warm, it's going to strengthen it and then push it up into Florida, possibly staying offshore, but you can't rule that out of having a landfall. The entire state at risk because of the entire width of this storm. Even the East Coast will be affected. All right, Anthony, let's go over to you.
We've seen overnight, because a lot of people went to sleep and it was a category 5 and it was moving toward the West Coast. We've seen some changes overnight. Chad, get us all up to date.
Victor, the storm made contact with Cuba overnight, and that's the biggest change to anything here. The new models coming out later this morning will have to deal with a Category 4, but only 130 miles per hour compared to 155, which was the number at 5 o'clock this morning. So things have really improved for the U.S. They have not improved for Cuba. The northern coast of Cuba getting pounded by this storm. Also the Cuban Keys right through here, and our Patrick Ottman, which is right there in the eye wall, picking up those winds of 130. The radar now picking up the storm. It is raining in Key West all the way up, even to Key Largo and into Miami. Less traffic today than there's been the past couple of days. Forecast is still for this to regain strength. The pressure is still lower than the pressure of Harvey. And that's what we saw in Texas, of course. We talk about the storm paralleling the coast of West Coast Florida and how the East Coast is not as in bigger trouble. But you know what? This is the bad side of the storm. We call that the dirty side of the storm. We have to add the movement of the storm with the wind field. And so as the winds pour onshore here, you're not out of the woods by any means. Ocala, Leesburg, all the way up the East Coast, from Port Jupiter to anywhere to Daytona Beach, all the way down south into Miami, because you're on the wrong side. You're on the bad side of the storm, also causing significant storm surge. Now, let me just use a different term. Flooding. Do you get that? Storm surge is water that will kill you. It is water that is 8 to 12 feet above sea level, and your house, if you live near the ocean, is not. That's what storm surge is. It is the push of the water, the pull of the water by the low and the difference in pressure. And as it pushes onshore, that water will get into the Everglades. It will get to you, Naples, and it will get to you, Fort Myers. And yes, we are concerned about your storm surge because the fatalities in water are greater than the fatalities in wind. Dr. Michael Brennan from the National Hurricane Center joins me now. Thank you so much for joining me. I know you guys are busy down there. Talk us through the 8 a.m. update.
Sure. Well, you can see the eye of Irma here on the radar from Key West. Its eye skirting the north coast of Cuba. That interaction with land has brought the peak winds down a little bit, but I don't want people to focus on that because the hazards from Irma are just now arriving through the Florida Keys and South Florida. These outer rain bands
All right,
are
John
beginning
Berman
to arrive.
here in Miami, where the rain is still falling.
And we
A
expect
little bit
Irma
of a
to
let up in the wind here in Miami, but we've been feeling the strength some time. I took my rain jacket off in solidarity here with my next guest, who's without a jacket, Dan Owens, an architect who lives right on the edge of the mandatory evacuation zone. And Dan, you chose to stay. Why?
For a lot of reasons, but my house is 8 feet above sea level, and it's a secure house. It's built to the Dade County building codes, which are really stringent and have been greatly developed since Hurricane Andrew. And I have a lot of friends who are staying, and I'm staying to help them out immediately after the storm. And there was no need to go. A lot of people do have to evacuate, but 3 million people can't get on the road.
What's your sense? As this storm, the forecast has now drifted west. It doesn't seem as if Miami will get a direct hit from the eye anymore, although it still seems we're going to feel hurricane force winds and a serious storm surge. You were saying your friends. What's your sense of the community here, if people are still being as careful as they need to be, or if maybe they're letting up a little bit?
Not at all. All of my friends, I've talked to them today, they're seeing secure houses. They're together. They're in good humor, but they're taking it seriously. I've never seen the community take a storm as seriously as this one, and it's good to see.
I think you have to, given especially the storm surge, which here could be 3 to 6 feet, which would be over where we're standing right now. On the West Coast, they're talking 10 to 15 feet. And for a while, they were forecasting very strong winds in Miami. And one of the concerns there, you're also an architect. I should note, is these cranes, these giant construction cranes, 20 to 25, a sign of the progress here in Miami, but also a source of concern because they can withstand high winds, but not the highest winds.
That's right. So that is a concern, and we're going to see what happens. They're not really built for Category 5 storms. They're meant to spin in the wind, and a lot of them are, as they go up, they're attached to buildings. So they're not just going to wobble and fly all over the city.
I think it's an important note. They are designed to twist like weather vanes. We've seen one of them twist already today. It's disconcerting when you see that boom move, but people need to know it's supposed to move, correct?
It's supposed to move. They're going to spin, and hopefully they're going to be fine.
Now, as a Floridian, what do you think Floridians will take from this experience? Because it's been a heck of a week in the run-up to this, and this storm has been pretty, it's taken this turn. The West Coast was very much in the cone, but I think now there's more danger over there than perhaps people anticipated.
Right. I actually have a lot of friends who evacuated to Naples and Tampa, and now they're there. And I think, but what I'm taking from it is the spirit of Miamians and how great everybody is together, the good humor, the good spirit, the wanting to help each other out. My neighbors have been great. And that's a side of, and we're a diverse community, and everybody really has each other's back. And it's a wonderful thing to be a part of and to feel. And it's a nice break from our daily American politics.
Well, look, you're going to need the spirit, the positive spirit you have right now after tomorrow to help people recover and rebuild. Just give me a sense of your plans for today. Hopefully after you're talking to me here, you're going to go home and stay home. What are your plans?
I'm going right home. I'm going to eat a lot of ice cream before the power goes out and watch reruns of Parks and Rec and just hang out.
We have a lot of friends now rushing over to do the duty with you of cleaning your house.
The Florida Keys and makes its way up the western coast of the Florida Peninsula. But a lot of people keep wanting to know, why is it going to make such a sharp turn to the north? Why not just keep going out over the open Gulf and head to the west? Because in theory, that's the track that it's been taking for much of its life. But there's a few things that you need to understand. Atmospherically, that's what's been going on. What has been steering it the last few days has been this high pressure just south of Bermuda. That's been guiding it to the west. But once it gets far enough west, it's now going to start to interact with this high pressure system just off the coast of Texas. That's going to block it from going too too far into the Gulf. It's going to continue to slide up the peninsula, and then this high pressure over the main portion of the U.S. is going to push out of the way, allowing that storm, at this point a remnant low, to really be able to push pretty far inland into portions of even Kentucky or Tennessee. So that's where most of the steering with this storm is going to come into play. In terms of the biggest impacts out of this storm, winds are certainly going to be one of the top ones. This information coming to us from the National Weather Service, this is going to be your peak wind gusts, the highest it's expected to get. We're talking 135 around Key West, 134 in Fort Myers, 132 in Tampa. These are new numbers coming into us. The highest number that we saw was in excess of 145 miles per hour, potentially along the western edge of Florida. Storm surge also going to be a big threat with this storm as well. Around Miami, we're looking at 4 to 6 feet. Areas of Key West, 5 to 10 feet. Naples and down south through that little inlet there that pushes in 10 to 15 feet. So that's certainly going to be the highest point. But even as you go further north, places like Tampa could be looking at 5 to 8 feet. So you have to understand what this means in terms of real scale things. Okay, so take, for example, a home. You think about a 1-story or a 2-story home. When we talk about storm surge that's 5 to 10 feet, not only does that cover most human beings that are at least 5 feet tall, but now you're talking at the 10 feet point, you've entirely covered the first story of a building. In some cases on Southwest Florida, we've been talking 15 feet. That starts to creep into the second story of a home. But the other thing you have to keep in mind too are the waves that will be mixed in. This is where you start to get really big inundation. And the other thing to note, guys, it's not just the water, it's everything that the water has taken out. So you've not only got very strong currents from those waves that can be knocking things around and adding higher onto those crests, but you've also got the debris that will be in here, not just on the surface, but that can be mixed down lower. So if you're in a car, if you're walking around trying to get places in this storm surge, those things can hit you and you may not even be able to see them. Or you're driving on the roads and something ends up knocking into your car. So this, again, one of the many reasons why you should not be out when this storm surge hits its peak, because it can be incredibly dangerous and deadly.
All right, Allison Ginger, thanks so much. Hopefully people are on much higher ground and evacuated well before that storm surge is an issue. Allison just reported the storm has begun to make the turn toward Florida. That means if you're in the Florida Keys, if you have stayed, watch out. Southern Florida, get ready. CNN's live special coverage of Hurricane Irma continues right after this quick break.
And as it moves out over these very warm waters in the Florida Straits, it's going to have about 12 or maybe even 18 hours over the water before it reaches the Keys, and then perhaps even a little more time over water after it passes the Keys before it finally moves inland somewhere along the west coast of Florida during the late in the day on Sunday or Sunday night. So a very dangerous situation, particularly for the Keys and for the Florida west coast, all the way from the Tampa Bay area southward to Naples. They could see the core of the major hurricane. And as you were just talking about that life-threatening storm surge, the Gulf Coast of Florida is particularly sensitive to storm surge. It's very high inundation values that can extend quite a ways inland. So that's a big concern of ours today.
The topography of the water across southwest Florida, the bathymetry or underwater topography, is different on the southwest side and on the east side. Tell us about how that will affect surge even into the Everglades, Doctor.
Right, yes, the bathymetry on the coastal shelf on the Gulf side is very shallow. So as you walk out into the water, the water doesn't get deep very fast. So all that water that's being pushed by the hurricane, so as Irma may come up like this, the northwesterly winds on the back side of it are going to drive that water, and it piles up and it can go really far inland here in the Naples area. It can go up these rivers and creeks near Fort Myers and up into the bays. So it can affect millions of people are at risk of life-threatening storm surge in these areas. There still is a significant storm surge risk on the southeast coast as well, particularly in Miami-Dade County along the west side of Biscayne Bay, and as well as in the Florida Keys. They're all at risk of this life-threatening surge event.
Let's shift our attention from Boca down to Miami and even to Homestead. What are the new updates for that as the storm has, let's say, shifted 20 miles to the west? What are your thought processes there?
still there. We can still see 5 to 10 feet of inundation all the way from Boca down around the southwest southern tip of the peninsula. Now, on the East Coast, as you mentioned, the storm surge threat doesn't extend as far inland, especially in Palm Beach and Broward counties. But here in Miami-Dade, it goes inland a lot farther along Biscayne Bay. So there's lots of people at risk that have been asked to evacuate for storm surge. And that storm surge threat is going to creep northward along the coast of the Gulf Coast and the Atlantic coast of Florida as we go through Sunday and even into Monday.
I have not many seconds left. I am a little bit concerned, Doctor, that we flood the Everglades with 12 feet of water, and Miami, let's say West Kendall, can flood from the backside. Are you looking at that at all?
Yeah, I mean, there is the potential for that. That's generally for a slower moving storm that would be a biggest threat for that type of flooding. But there's going to be a lot of water with this storm. There's going to be a lot of rainfall. So there's going to be a lot of flooding problems just in general in the Florida Peninsula, either from storm surge and or the combination of very heavy rain. So everybody's going to want to keep an eye out for that.
Thank you, Doctor. Also, some displaced wildlife, in particular alligators, that I'm a little bit worried about, but I don't like wildlife anyway. Doctor, thank you very much. We'll talk to you at 11 o'clock. People, this is the real deal. This truly is. If you are in Key West, you need to go. This could be a 140-mile-per-hour storm knocking down the entire city. I was married there. I love Key West. I love how it looks, but this is the real deal. Victor. Are from the east, the wrong direction, blowing the water into Biscayne Bay and up the intercoastal. And our Victor Blackwell right there. But look, I want you to look at the blue. I want you to look at the blue area that I've painted in here. This is what happens with a 6-foot storm surge through Miami. You say, well, it could be more than that. Sure, yes, it could. But let's just go 6 just to say that, because it's easy to put 2 meters in my computer here. Look at all of this. Look at all the downtown that is completely wet. The people that think they're going to ride it out in skyscrapers are going to have their elevator shafts completely wet, not being able to get up and down from their building, and be cut off and likely probably have no power. And that's if you just get missed compared to where we're seeing right now, because really Miami is a slight miss as the storm is going to the west. As the storm has moved to the west in the overnight hours, we did see a slight shift to about Key West to Naples. And now Naples, you are really in the middle of what should be the eye wall in 24 to 36 hours. The eye wall is still over Cuba. It lost a lot of intensity overnight. The wind is now 130, but don't take your eye off the ball here. This is still a very big storm, and it's forecast to get back into warm water and likely get back up to a Category 5 before making landfall, pushing water over Cudjoe Key, Summerland Key, Big Pine Key, Key West itself, and then on up into the Florida Bay area.
Where the storm goes,
Everglades
what do
City,
you do with all the
possibly
animals?
to Naples.
Well, the first thing is we don't evacuate them from the zoo. A lot of people think we do that, but the bottom line is this. Storms can change direction at the last second, and you're evacuating right into the path of the storm. Also, a lot of people, they think they evacuate their dogs, their cats, their horses. These are domestic animals that are used to being transported. These are wild animals in the zoo. And often when you try to evacuate an animal like that, moving it from its natural place, the stress can be so overwhelming, it can be more dangerous to the animal than the storm itself. So what we do is, I've been at the zoo now for 38 years. We experienced Hurricane Andrew, which totally leveled the zoo. The north eye wall of the hurricane came right through Zoo Miami and leveled it.
We have some pictures of that. I think they're going to show.
Yeah,
we have some hurricanes.
Yeah,
I think some pictures of Hurricane Andrew.
Right. We had animals like storks we put in the bathrooms. We had the flamingos in the bathrooms. We used the public restrooms as bunkers for a lot of those animals, and it was a very successful method. But since that hurricane leveled the entire zoo and we rebuilt it understanding hurricanes are part of our lives. So now we have these wonderful buildings within the zoo that we now move these animals into. We don't have to use the public restrooms anymore. And most of the animals actually stay in their exhibits, Anderson, because things like lions and gorillas and tigers, elephants, they're held in areas that are strong enough to withstand the strength of the animal itself. So they're also strong enough to withstand these hurricanes. Having survived things like Hurricane Andrew, and Katrina, and Wilma, we know that they are good places to bunker these animals down in. The smaller animals, small birds, small mammals, we put them in small sky kennels or small enclosures, and we move those into the buildings.
So it's really key to just reduce stress on them as much as possible.
Absolutely, because people just don't realize, we would evacuate if we were in a flood zone. Now, with floods and a storm surge, a huge storm surge, you cannot keep an animal there because it has nowhere to go. It can drown. But our Zoo Miami is not in that type of location. That is not a risk. We have to protect them from wind and flying debris. And with the structures we have in our house, it's just like people in hurricane. You don't really evacuate because of wind. You evacuate basically because of storm surge and flooding.
Ron McGill, I appreciate all your efforts, and we'll want to check in with you at the end of this just to make sure everything ends up all right with the animals. Thanks so much, Ron. We're going to take another short break, and our coverage continues.
Okay, cool. That's the area that we're really watching here. Farther to the north, Tampa, you are now closer to the eye than you were yesterday, or the center. There may not be an eye by that time. But Orlando, you're going to pick up 100 to 115, and even toward Tampa, likely 95 to 100 miles per hour. Now, there are bigger buildings in Florida than you might expect, because they don't build on sand, they build on coral. They go down and they get some bedrock. And so there are many big buildings in Florida, especially in Miami, 70 over 40 stories tall. If the wind is 145, then all of a sudden you're 174 or almost to 190. So let's reduce this because the storm is slightly farther away. If you're 100 miles an hour at the surface, you'd be 120, 30 stories up, and you'd be probably closer to 150, another almost category higher due to the fact that there's no friction up above and the wind blows any way that it wants to up there and blows through those buildings. Most of those windows are hurricane rated. What does that mean when the building's not finished? And there are so many buildings in the Miami area that still have towers, still have cranes, still have some windows in, some windows out. There you go, Key West. You are in 100 miles per hour or more. Naples, Fort Myers, Sarasota, same story. And even into Key West, from all the way to Key West to Tampa, could be still a hurricane, Cat 1 or Cat 2, all the way up into central or northern Florida. Winds in Atlanta, probably 60 or 70. Wow, it's a crazy storm. Back to you guys.
All right, Chad Myers.
Good morning, everyone. And again, this is a monster storm, meaning it has strong winds, and it's still a very large geographical storm. Winds at 155 miles per hour. It actually made landfall in Cuba as a Category 5. And even though it's been interacting with land, it has only slightly weakened to those 155 mile per hour winds. We're starting to see the eye reemerge off the coast of Cuba at this point. But look how wide this wind field is. We're starting to even see some of those outer rain bands in Florida. Now here, unfortunately, is the latest track, and it's something that we weren't hoping to see, that is shifting just ever so slightly to the west, which means somewhere in the Keys around sunrise tomorrow, we'll feel a landfalling Category 4 hurricane between Key West and Miami. At this point, all the thinking is that it's going to head up toward the Naples area and make landfall there as a Category 4 hurricane, putting the worst storm surge Sunday afternoon near the Everglades. Now, here is another issue and problem with that shift toward the west. It keeps it over the warm waters of the Gulf of Mexico a little longer, which means when it finally does come on shore, it's closer to us. It doesn't have as much time to weaken. And that's why we believe that just about the entire Tampa Bay area will feel hurricane force winds Sunday night into Monday morning, possibly even Category 2 or Category 3 force winds. And that's going to bring down some trees and power lines. But this is a fast mover. By Monday afternoon, it is already moving into Georgia. So this is what those computer models all, again, unfortunately taking that westerly jog, moving it up basically along I-75. And this is the new addition to the hurricane warnings up to Brooksville, up to Hernando County. A warning means you could feel hurricane force winds within 36 hours. There is also now a storm surge warning that extends all the way up to Hernando County, meaning that at least a small storm surge is expected within 36 hours. So here's the timing. Last day to prepare your home or evacuate is today. In fact, I would even say it's this morning. For tomorrow, the morning is going to be gusty. We'll start to feel the outer rain bands, but tomorrow afternoon and evening, that's when the damaging wind and flooding rain is a possibility as we head into Monday. Monday morning is going to be bad, but the rain is actually going to end by midday. Our next threat then is some coastal flooding due to an onshore wind after the storm passes. But let's talk about specifics of what's worth this.
Where Key West and wind from 8 a.m. That's first landfall. where Naples equal Fort Myers when tomorrow afternoon. And it could get intense, more intense after it passes Key West. So here's the storm now coming off of the Cuban coast where our Patrick Oppman has done.
You're looking at your live pictures of Flagler Beach, which is near Daytona Beach, just to give you a sense of, well, this storm is out there. It is coming. It is coming fast. But it has been deceptively calm in a lot of parts of Florida today, here in Fort Myers, other than occasional bands of rain just over the last hour or so. It's been sunny outside. Folks have been walking around. But they know, based on the new tracking that we got this morning, that this storm has moved west. Fort Myers, Tampa, Naples, and Point South on the west all are in the line of sight of this. We're obviously watching very closely to see if there are any movements in this storm, because that could have a big difference. I want to bring in reporter Randy Kay. You've been driving around, and you know, one of the things in Fort Myers is a lot of people just thought they were going to ride it out, but now that it's shifted west, all of a sudden they were going to shelters. You and I both drove by a shelter. You were able to stop at it. There were so many people outside there.
Yeah, you couldn't help but notice it off the highway. We were all going up 75 North, and there was this massive crowd of people, as you saw. So we quickly jumped off, and it turns out it's Germain Arena, which is a hockey place, a hockey stadium, and thousands of people were lined up. Some had been there since early in the morning. It opened at 10 a.m., and they were there just, you know, trying to seek shelter because they saw the storm shift, as you said, the track shift. So they were there with, you know, dogs and their children and their belongings. I saw people carrying soup cans. One guy had a yoga mat to sleep on. There were people in wheelchairs. There was one guy who had a prosthetic leg. There were a lot of elderly who were waiting, and others were holding their place in line. It was a really difficult scene, but they were all just hoping to seek shelter there instead of in their own homes. And we talked to a few of them, and here's just a sampling of what we heard.
You changed your itinerary every time you looked at the map.
Yeah, we've been to like
Trying to figure out.
Should we go to Atlanta? No, we'll go to Kissimmee. No, we'll stay at my cousin's house. No, we'll go to another shelter. Should we stay in our house? No, now we're at this shelter.
Do you feel like you waited too long to decide?
Yeah, totally. I wanted to leave on Monday.
My fault.
It's like if it's the biggest hurricane ever, just leave and then you're not stuck. Gas was great on Monday.
How long have you been waiting in line?
About 4 hours. It's been a long wait.
Is this your only hope for shelter from Irma?
Well, yes, with animals, yes, it is, yeah. Unfortunately, things are closing fast.
You're at the end here. How do you feel about that?
Well, it's all right. I came with my elderly neighbor who's 87 and couldn't walk well, so he went to the front of the line, and I hope to somehow find him in there.
And thankfully, the weather was okay. I mean, it was hot, obviously, and miserable, but it wasn't pouring rain for those people who were waiting for hours.
No, and it was actually a little cool. It was a little overcast because the storm is coming. But their main worry was, will they all get inside? A lot of them were just seated, wondering, and there was the National Guard there. And so we asked them. We interviewed Lieutenant Greg Bueno from the Florida Highway Patrol, actually, and he told us that it holds about 8,000 people. By the time we were there were about 1,000 inside, so it had plenty of room, which was great news because the line wrapped as you saw, wrapped all the way around the parking lot. So, and he also inside, the National Guard will be there. They have food, water, air conditioning. So hopefully it'll be a good place for all of these folks to ride it out.
And last we heard from Drew Griffin, who's there, that there is still room. The problem, of course, is getting there for people because the public shuttles, those shut down hours ago.
Right. And we also looked at the parking lot, which was pretty full as well. So the question is, though, these people have been waiting in line 4, 5, 6 hours, as some of them told us. And you sort of wonder, well, why didn't they leave town, before that? Because if you could drive maybe 4, 5, 6 hours, maybe you could get away from it. But it was a tough situation to see. So I just hope they all get inside and they're all safe.
Yeah. There's so many, considerations when you're thinking about evacuating your pets, your medicine, your loved ones, gasoline, just the fear of being on the highway, getting stuck in traffic, things like that. Randy, thanks for that. We'll have more on that tonight in our coverage. We're going to take another short break and be right back.
yeoman's duty all night long with this wind. He had the southern eye wall all night long. Now it is beginning to push some rain into South Florida. Every time a band goes by, you will get increased winds. So Homestead, all the way down to Cutler Bay, you're seeing some wind come in. Anytime later on this afternoon a storm comes in, there's even a potential for a small tornado or two. So keep that in mind, something else to worry about. The watches have gone all the way up now into Georgia. Hurricane warnings to the entire southern half of Florida. But overnight, Michael, what happened was that the model, and we're going to talk about these models here in a half hour. So the model shifted 20 miles farther to the west. So now not a landfall near Marathon, Florida, likely a landfall in the lower Keys, somewhere Cudjoe Key, Big Pine Key, all the way down, maybe even to Key West. And that's a big difference because now that puts Fort Myers in play of a landfalling hurricane and also makes Tampa a much more dangerous place to be with gusts there possibly to 120.
Has the destruction that it has thus far in any way diminished its capabilities when it does get to the United States?
If the storm does not regain strength over the Florida Strait, it's going 12 miles per hour. It's got 90 miles to go. You know, do the math. That's 8 hours. If in 8 hours it can't get its stuff back in a group, then yes, that has diminished the potential for what the damage could be. But it doesn't diminish the damage that will be caused by storm surge. Remember, even Katrina didn't come on shore as a 5, but because it was a 5 in the Gulf, it had that bubble of water that it was carrying with it. Well, this has a bubble of water too. It's going to carry that storm surge into the Everglades, right through the Southern Keys, right into Cape Coral and Fort Myers and the Naples area and Venice. All those people that have homes right on canals and their homes only 4 feet above sea level, you need to get out of there because the water is going to be higher than here.
So pardon, but I keep hearing you use the words and others, storm surge.
Mm-hmm.
Define it, and for how long does it last?
It's a flood. How's that?
Perfect. That I understand.
Because people you don't understand the word storm surge. It's a great term. It's what it is. It's how the water comes on shore one wave after another, but it is a flood that will kill you. Water kills more people than wind. So call it whatever you want. Call it something that you shouldn't be in, because when the storm surge comes in, it's impossible to get out of because the roads are already flooded. So once you're in it, you're in it to lose it.
One more naive question me for these, but I'm curious. I see all the color on the map. It is behind you right now. Over Cuba. What exactly am I looking at with all of those different colorations? I noticed that there had been purple, now there's not purple. Explain it to me.
What you see behind me here is a forecast, again a model. You know, I mean, think about when we were kids. We would buy a little 1967 Camaro and we put the model together with model glue and our fingers would be all stuck together. This is a model trying to model a car, but we're trying to model the atmosphere. Significantly more complicated. So what you're seeing here is a model of what we believe the radar will look like. If I keep pushing the button, it goes right over Tampa. Push the button again, you see what the winds are going to be, 50, 60, 100. And then it's the high cloud tops that we've been watching over the next couple days. What's been happening here? The colors you see behind me, this is wind field. The white, 100 mile per hour gusts or greater, and keep West, your gust's going to be 130 or 150. So that's 150 or greater in some spots. And then up to Fort Myers, there's your white. And I know it's confusing and you have to look up here and we're pushing the button so fast and you have to see where the key is. But the key to this one is the winds are going to be over 100 in many places over South Florida.
Chad Myers, we will revisit with you in a couple of minutes. Thank you so much for that.
With the latest. Lonnie, good morning.
And good morning to you. Good morning, everybody. You know, where Jeff Glore is located down there on Biscayne Bay, we just checked in on the stats. They've already had 1 foot. That's not much, but they've had 1 foot of storm surge, and this storm is miles away. Let me give you the latest information from the National Hurricane Center. This is the latest update that just came in moments ago. You're going to notice the wind speed has come down. And I can tell you why it came down. It was up at 155 miles per hour. It's now down to 130 mile per hour maximum wind. That's because it's interacting with the north shore of Cuba. We've had a landfall that wasn't anticipated, a little wobble to the south. That's what these things do. Okay, they wobble back and forth. It is forecast, though, to continue off to the northwest of 12 miles per hour. Right now, 225 miles from Miami, so we've got to get to the track. Has the track changed? Well, it still sees that big turn to the north. Very possible to see a landfall around the Florida Keys as a Cat 4. And again, right now at 130 miles per hour, that's barely a Cat 4. 129, you're into a Cat 3. But we believe the Florida Straits, that water is so warm, it's going to strengthen it and then push it up into Florida. Possibly staying offshore, but you can't rule that out of having a landfall. The entire state at risk because of the entire.
The morning's going to be bad. But the rain day, our next threat then is coastal flooding due to an onshore wind after the storm passes. But let's talk about specifics with Ed Bloodsworth.
The model on the European model, we talk about
I think it
all
was
the
a
time
4 degree shift.
The European model
made it hit
has
the town of Punta Gorda, not the areas that people had anticipated. Let's go to Allison Chinchar with the latest on the storm. Allison, what have you learned from the 5 o'clock update?
Right, so the latest that we've had is we are continuing to see that turn towards the north. That's going to be your biggest update that we've been seeing. And we expected it to do this. We know that at some point it is going to make that turn to basically almost all northward movement. It's still moving at about 9 miles per hour, though, so it is still relatively slow. But we do expect to see maybe perhaps that increase in the wind speed coming up in the next advisory because the pressure has started to drop. Now, usually the pressure drops first and the wind increase follows shortly thereafter. But now it's getting back out over open water, and that's the fuel that these storms need to allow them to intensify. And as it moves farther away from Cuba, it will get into that really warm water. So we do expect it to get back up to a Category 4 strength as it crosses over the Florida Keys and continues up the west coast. Places like Naples, Fort Myers could still be looking at a Category 4 storm as it skirts along those areas. However, by the time we get to Tampa, we do expect some weakening. And then by the time it ends up making it towards the Georgia-Florida state line, we'll be lucky at that point if it still remains a Category 1 storm. 75 miles per hour is that minimum threshold there from a tropical storm to a Category 1 hurricane. But again, that track does continue to take it in through Florida. We talked about the warm water. We're talking upper 80s for the temperatures in that tiny section between Cuba and towards Florida. And that's where it's going to be entering. That's why we expect it to intensify back up to a Category 4 storm before it edges in towards Florida. Now, some of the main concerns with this storm, first and foremost, are going to be the winds, especially if it really is a Category 4 at landfall. We're talking max wind gusts around 135 in Key West, 134 in Fort Myers, even 132 around Tampa. These numbers coming to us from the National Weather Service. The other impact that's going to be there is going to be rainfall. Widespread across Florida, you're talking 6 to 10 inches of rain, but there will be some heavier pockets mixed in that could see in excess of 15 inches of rain. That won't be widespread, but even still, certainly enough to cause some flooding concerns. Even as the storm pushes farther north into other states, South Carolina, Georgia, Alabama, these states could also be looking at widespread 4 to 6 inches of rain as that storm continues its slow movement. One of the big things people want to know about is the timing for some of the cities. So let's break that down. Naples is likely to have tropical storm force winds arrive as early as 5 a.m. Sunday morning. Hurricane force winds just a few hours after that. Rainfall total, again, we talk 10 to 12 inches potentially in Naples, and that storm surge, that's going to be key. 10 to 15 feet. That's not only the first story of a building, but that's starting to creep into the second story of a home or a business. Tampa, it's going to be a little bit later, but the impacts are still there. We're talking tropical storm force winds arriving in the afternoon, the early afternoon of Sunday. Hurricane force winds arriving by early evening on Sunday. Rainfall about 6 to 8 inches, and that storm surge about 5 to 8 feet. Here's a look at the radar. Don't forget, we also have the potential for severe weather. Tornado warnings have been occurring throughout the day today, and we have a tornado watch in effect for much of southern Florida through the day today, and that may even extend into tomorrow and further north as the system continues to push further off to the north. And it's mainly from those outer bands. So here's the look at severe weather threats for today. Damaging winds, but also the potential for isolated tornadoes. And again, this is just for today. This is likely going to push off to the north and into other states as we go into the coming days, and it becomes a bigger threat for places like Georgia, Alabama, as well as South Carolina.
Allison, I'm really struck by the slowness of the storm. Just looking at your timeline there, you know, Naples seeing hurricane force winds in the morning. Hurricane force winds not in Tampa, which is a couple hours away drive, 2 hour drive Fort Myers to Tampa. But they're not seeing hurricane force winds until about 8 o'clock Sunday night. And this thing is moving up the west coast all day tomorrow.
Yeah, so you just talked about, you said about a 2 hour drive, but you have to keep in mind, you're driving a car 60, 70 miles per hour. This thing is moving only 9 miles per hour. So that's why there's such a huge difference there. It's not very fast. So it takes a long time to get from Naples up towards Tampa. And that's why there's such a big difference there, Anderson.
Yeah. Allison Chinchar, again, we'll continue checking with you. Kyung La is in Miami Beach for us. Kyung, obviously now the storm seems to be on the same track. Getting a sense of when it may make that turn. But again, for people in Miami Beach, it's really all about storm surge.
It is about the surge, and they are expecting the worst of it this evening. That's why the Miami Beach Police Department has put in a curfew starting at 8 p.m., sending out a message to anyone who didn't follow and adhere to the mandatory evacuation that's in place here, to make sure that they know that if they are out on the streets, whether in their cars or they're walking around, that they are subject to arrest from between the hours of 8 p.m. and 7 a.m. And this is happening just as we're starting to see some more sustained winds, some heavier winds and rain. And I want you to take a look at what the ocean is looking at right now. You can see the palm trees. They're really dancing here, but out there you can see that the ocean, there are a lot of waves. And that's really what has the fire department and the police department and this city very concerned. It is the storm surge. They still anticipate, even though the eye coming across here will not happen, they are very concerned about the storm surge because this is a place that can flood even on a sunny day. So when you have these types of conditions, the wind and the rain, there are areas where the fire department has already been out trying to cut through some of the branches that have fallen. They're still trying to help people out who have stayed behind. The concern about the surge and whether people will be out and perhaps caught off guard and drowned, a very big concern for the city. Anderson?
Yeah, and Kyung, it's so important to point out, as Allison Chinchar just did, that it's a Cat 3 storm right now, but as it moves through those warm waters in the Gulf, it is, with all likelihood, all expectations are that it will be Category 4 by the time it reaches the Keys, by the time even hitting Naples, Florida.
That is a big concern about the strength and it picking up and what it's going to mean as it churns out over those waters. Because, I mean, you can see, and that's something that all meteorologists are wondering, what's going to happen out there in the ocean as it churns out there, maybe not over here, but certainly as it heads further to the west.
Yeah. Kyung, thanks very much. Brian Todd is standing by in West Palm Beach. Brian, how are things there? How are the preparations going?
Well, Anderson, we're now about 2 hours into a curfew imposed by Palm Beach County authorities. This is the Royal Park Bridge. Authorities and police are telling us that bridges like this are going to be shut down in the coming hours. They're not giving an exact timetable of when, but when this storm hits in earnest, when the brunt of it is here, you're going to see bridges like this shut down because they are, of course, elevated. They don't want people on these bridges. And I can give you kind of a sense here to your right, my left, as we pan down on the intercoastal waterway. You get a sense of the approach of the storm. The clouds are darkening over there. You can see the palm trees over on the right where the wind is kicking up, and the wind has been kicking up gradually all afternoon. Now look at, we've been talking about storm surge all day. Look at all the water here on the intercoastal waterway. With storm surges approaching 4 to 5, 6 feet, possibly higher here, plus high tides tomorrow, you can see how on the right-hand side, that's West Palm Beach, how that could be flooded. And if you go to the left-hand side here, that's Palm Beach, the barrier island. It's at a slightly lower elevation. You can see how that could be easily and more quickly flooded with the storm surge. So you get a sense of just on the intercoastal waterway here, all the water that could surge up onto both shorelines here in Palm Beach County. Another thing we've been talking about all day, Anderson, these construction sites over here, just to your right here, we're going to show you, zoom in on these cranes. These cranes are tethered to the skeleton of that 14-story building. But again, we're going to watch the wind speed. The wind speed, these things are not built to withstand a Category 5. They would probably be in some trouble in a Category 4. So it's going to be a little bit dicey watching these things sway in the wind. As we've been saying, those large horizontal booms at the top are designed to twist around in the wind like a weather vane and not offer some resistance that might topple those cranes down. But we've had local residents tell us they're concerned. Look, you've got an apartment building over there on the right-hand side of this one crane. You've got another apartment just to the left of the other crane. A lady who lives in that tall apartment building there came out and told us she's concerned about these cranes and about that one toppling over on her building. So that's going to be something that we're going to be watching closely, Anderson. And authorities here are telling us the same thing fire chief told residents there earlier. Because there's a western track to this storm, we're still going to get the back end of a lot of that, and that's some nasty stuff coming through here. Just because it's tracking on the west coast of Florida, don't get complacent. Do not come back to your homes tonight or tomorrow thinking we're just not going to get much here. We are going to get it here, but they're just saying do not get complacent with this. Don't take it for granted. Stay away.
Yeah, Brian, it is also, I think, worth reminding people, we focus so much on storm surge and if it's 5 to 8 feet, as people say, it may be in Tampa or 10 to 15 in a place like Naples, Florida, which is incredibly alarming. If there's a high winds, you've also got potential for waves on top of that storm surge. So you're talking, a rise in the water of 10 to 15 feet, but waves on top of that, that obviously can make a lot of damage. And really that, of course, depends, as I said, on the wind.
Absolutely does. Storm surge, we talk about it all the time, and I think we've been good over the past day or so of actually defining it for our viewers. It is that those levels above normal. When we talk 4 to 6 feet of storm surge here in the West Palm Beach area along the intercoastal, that's 4 to 6 feet above that level right there. We're at low tide now, by the way, so the tide's going to be higher in about 12 hours. So we're at low tide now. The tide is going to come up 4 to 6 feet above that. Then, as you mentioned, Anderson, wave activity on top of that. That means that's going to be a washover there, probably on Flagler Avenue, Flagler Drive here in in Palm Beach. So, and again, over here to the left, Palm Beach, the barrier island, that's a lower elevation. It's flooding there. You're right. The wave activity just makes it worse.
Yeah, Brian Todd, appreciate you being there. We're going to take a short break and our coverage continues coming up.
Better on the storm. Now, the American model did better on the snowstorm of 2015. They're about 15 or 20 miles apart. And Michael, if you put that same line, you put these two same lines in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean, let me put it ahead here for you. If you say, okay, the storm's going to be here, that's the American model, there's the European model, boy, they're really close. Because you know what?
Is in the Weather Center. Allison, let's bring us up to date.
Right, Anderson. So we take a look at what we've got for right now. Again, you've got some imagery here where we can see the latest on IRMA. Winds right now 125 miles per hour, gusting up to 155 miles per hour. The movement, it's been what we call wobbling, okay, where it's going back and forth between west and north and west and north. The question is, when does it finally start to make that really sharp turn to the north? We focus on the maximum wind gusts. Notice for the most part, it's the western half of Florida where we have our strongest winds. Key West, this will be our peak maximum wind gusts around 138 miles per hour. But say up around Fort Myers, 136, even Tampa going to be in the triple digits, right around 116 miles per hour. The track itself will still take it over portions of the Keys and then riding up along the western coast, making it very close call towards Naples, Fort Myers, even into Tampa. So those are going to be the cities of concern going forward in about the next 36 to 48 hours. Here's a look at the forecast radar. So this shows you not just where it's headed, but where some of the heavy rain is going to be as well. When we get to Sunday morning, this is when we really start to see incredibly heavy downpours for cities like Miami into Fort Myers. Then we push into Sunday afternoon and evening. Now Tampa's starting to get some incredibly heavy rainfall. And then the system itself begins to make its way into portions of Georgia and also into South Carolina. Overall rainfall totals, we're talking widespread 6 to 10 inches of rain, but it could even be slightly higher than that, and especially when you get some of those outer bands where you could end up getting incredibly heavy downpours for several hours at a time. But the rain spreads even farther north. So even states like Alabama, Georgia, and South Carolina could end up picking up, say, 4 to 6 inches of rain. We've noticed the hurricane watches and warnings continue to spread to the north. Hurricane warnings now extending from the northernmost part all the way down to the entire state. And we now have tropical storm watches in effect for portions of South Carolina as well as Georgia. Anderson?
You know, you talk about that turn. Any way to estimate when that turn north might occur? Because obviously, you know, there are tens of thousands of people watching that very closely because it's going to affect exactly where this thing goes.
Right. Likely it will happen within the next 6 to 12 hours, but you also have to keep in mind that's getting awfully close to when we expect it to cross over the Florida Keys. You've got a couple of things driving it. You've got a high pressure system sitting out here over the open Atlantic. You've got a high pressure sitting right around Texas coastline. Those two combinations are what's going to be driving it to push that right-hand turn over the main peninsula of Florida. Then you also have that high that's over the main portion of the U.S. that's going to break away. That's what's going to allow the storm, once it crosses into places like Georgia and Tennessee, and take its track from there. But ultimately, Anderson, again, 6 hours versus 12. We know it's likely going to happen. But if it's 6 versus huge difference on landfall. So again, while we have a range, the opposite ends of that range could mean huge differences for several cities.
Keys, and maybe most importantly on the west coast of Florida and when. Allison.
That's right, John. So we take a look at the current numbers that we have right now. Irma is a Category 3 storm, but a very strong Category 3 storm. Winds right now 125 miles per hour, just 5 miles per hour stronger, and it would be a Category 4 storm. So I want you to understand, you're talking a difference of 5 miles per hour here. So don't focus on the category number so much, but the intensity of the winds. Movement is west at about 9 miles per hour, but we have started to see at least a slight shift off to the north as well. One of the big concerns is going to be maximum wind gusts. Take a look at some of these numbers. Key West, we're talking around 138 miles per hour. This will be at the peak as the storm is crossing over that region. Naples and Fort Myers also in that 130 to 130 mile per hour range. Even Tampa likely to be around 116. Now the East Coast, while it may not be as strong, you're still talking pretty strong wind gusts. In fact, Orlando looking at 95 miles per hour for their peak wind gust. Storm surge is also going to be a huge
All right, John Berman in Miami. Hurricane Irma has begun making the turn to the north. We are feeling consistent winds now here in Miami, 30 miles an hour, maybe a little bit more, and they probably won't go down for 12, 24 hours right now. Here to stay as this storm moves ever closer to the Florida Peninsula. Joining me now, David Halstead, the former Director of Emergency Management in the state of Florida. David, thanks so much for being with us, talking about the wind, but it does seem that the real concern right now is the storm surge, particularly on the west coast of Florida, talking about 10 to 15 feet in some places. And when you hear from the governor, when you hear from the director of FEMA, that's for watching so very closely. Why is it such a threat?
The storm surge, especially on the west coast, that's a lower area than we are here, even Miami. 10, 15 feet would have been a real problem here. Over there, it's really a hazard and a concern for life safety. So the governor and certainly Administrator Long are all saying the right things, as are the local officials. Remember, the people are listening to their local officials. That is, evacuate or get to a shelter. We saw long lines today at a shelter, but that cleared up. And now those folks are in a safe environment.
And to be clear, Drew Griffin was at that shelter with a long line. Everyone's inside now, and there still is space there. Some of the free buses have stopped running. You have to get yourself there. That's a little bit of a concern. People need to evacuate from these low-lying areas. Why do they need to listen so carefully?
They need to listen so carefully because people are going to die because of water. Rarely are they going to die because of the winds. Rarely are they going to die from other causes. What they're going to die from is flooding and storm surge. And right now, storm surge has the potential of being the real killer on the West Coast, and still a big concern here on the East Coast. And I'm still very concerned, and I think everyone is, about what's going to happen down in the Keys as that storm moves through.
The Keys may feel a direct hit in just a few hours as the storm passes over. Let's come here to Miami, because may not get a hit from the eye, but probably expecting hurricane force winds, at least gusts, at a storm surge of 3 to 6 feet. What should the message be to the people here who've probably been inside for days now watching, now saying, hey, the eye might not hit here? What should they be careful of?
Well, I think all of Florida should follow Miami-Dade and Miami Beach's approach to this. They're taking this exceptionally seriously. They're going to stay sheltered down. They're going to stay off the roadways until the hurricane force winds and tropical storm winds have gone by. And then another danger has the potential of coming behind it, and that is people coming out too early, becoming injured, driving on flooded streets, not looking for down power lines. So we still got some dangers even after the storm. But so far, this area in particular has obeyed those evacuation orders.
Yeah. Not come back until you are told to. David, hang on one second. We have some pictures here I want to show people on I-4. This is I-4, the famous highway that goes across the state of Florida right now. We're seeing a lot of cars there, long lines, people trying to move inland from the west. They still have a little time that far north, David. What should they be thinking?
They should be thinking, let's evacuate, let's get to a shelter, or let's get into a home that's been fortified to withstand certainly Category 3 type storm winds, because that looks like what Central Florida, according to our meteorologists, is going to expect.
And again, just to focus on storm surge for one brief moment, when we say, 3 to 6 feet or 10 to 15 feet, it's not as if there's a wave and then it goes away. That water sticks around.
It stays around until the winds change, and then typically those winds will push it back offshore. But we could be talking 4, 5, 6 hours of these large amount of water and high water into these areas.
That means up until the first stories of the house. Just one last thing before they get they may get a direct hit. What could happen there? Will they be cut off?
They could be cut off. What we planned for when we were at the division, Craig Fugate and I, we planned for a Category 4 or 5 hitting the Keys, not so much destroying the bridge, because those bridges are pretty intact, but all of the ways onto the bridges are susceptible to high water and high waves. So if they cuts off the roadway to get to a bridge, you might as well down the bridge, because you can't get to them by land. So therefore, you've heard Administrator Long talk about naval vessels, helicopters. That's going to be the only way to get to those folks at one end of the Keys if they are cut off.
All right, David Halstead, former Director of Emergency Management here in Florida. I hope people have been listening to you, heeding the warnings from you and from all the current officials now, warning people to evacuate while they still have time. Hurricane Irma, again, making that bend now to the north, very close to the Florida Keys, inching toward the peninsula itself. CNN special live coverage continues.
Right, with this particular storm. We got some updated numbers a few hours ago that really made these numbers rise. In fact, especially in the southwest portion. say Naples down toward Key Largo, we're talking 10 to 15 feet. Miami down towards Key West, 5 to 10 feet. Even around the Fort Myers area, you're talking 6 to 10 feet. The numbers, however, you have to understand what they mean. So let's take a look at this, for example. Just to talk about storm surge. 10 feet is what an average first-story building is. So if you have storm surge of 10 feet, and keep in mind, some places we're actually forecasting higher than 10 feet. Some areas it could be as much as 15 feet, which means it would start creeping into the second story of a home or a business or something like that. But this is just the storm surge. Now you also have to factor in the waves. This is where true inundation takes place, because it's not just the amount of rain or not just the amount of water that has been pushed in from the storm surge, but those waves, the crests of those waves can add even a couple more feet on top of that. So you talk about 5 to 6 feet. You know, if you've got a person that's 6 feet tall, you are now completely submerged underwater, and you've got the waves moving everything around. This is where it gets very concerning, especially those higher amounts too. You could have cars submerged. So if you take that car out onto a street as the storm surge is pushing in, you will have absolutely no control over that vehicle, even though the car may not be fully submerged at that point. Now, when we talk about the track, this is the part that everybody is concerned about, because you want to know where landfall is expected to be. However, because of the size of the storm, at this point, that really is just semantics. Everybody around Florida is going to get some impact from this storm. Some will just get like bigger impacts than others, namely the winds. Here's what we expect. We do expect it to increase back to a Category 4 strength storm as it crosses over the Keys and continues its way up the West Coast. Right now, landfall could be anywhere from, say, Naples to Fort Myers, even up around Tampa. And Tampa is a huge city. A lot of people in Tampa did not necessarily evacuate, especially several days ago, thinking this was mostly going to be an East Coast main landfall of a storm. But that is now starting to change. Then we see the track kind of push further into the north states like Alabama, Georgia, as well as Tennessee. And the other thing, John, to note is we are still talking a pretty good amount of rain. We've talked about storm surge. We've talked about wind, but don't count out the rain. We could be looking at widespread rainfall totals of 6 to 12 inches of rain.
All right, Allison Chinchar, an important forecast, the point that people should really listen to there, where you're talking about.
And we're live in the Weather Center right here, of course, tracking Hurricane Irma. And we're going to go right to the satellite imagery and show you the latest advisory that came in. 3 p.m. is when they just did a kind of a position update along with a maximum wind speed update. 125 miles per hour was the last update we came in. Steve Jervey's here with us now. He's been updating everyone on 970 WFLA, the radio. So we're keeping you informed on the web, on the radio, on air right now.
All of a sudden, we're a bigger deal because the mayor's sitting right over there.
Yes.
So, all of a sudden, is it going to proclaim this National Weather Day? No, I hope not. Well, hopefully it's National Preparation Day, because that's what we really want to see as people get ready for this major hurricane that is running at 125 right now, running right along the northern part of the Cuban coast. Recall 24 hours ago, we had 155 mile per hour winds. It's been interacting with land now for a day and a half. So that tends to take a lot of the fuel, the warm water for the system, and that's why a large reason why it's weakened. But we're just waiting for that northerly turn, which the computer models have suggested for days now will occur, and they still continue to suggest that, as does the official track, Julie.
Exactly, and we're still looking at really the Keys getting hit hard by the system first as we head into Sunday morning. Could be a Category 4 storm again. That looks likely as it moves to the north and west. Of course, exactly which area in the Keys it hits, the eye passes over would depend on how quickly it turns towards the north, and then it will continue north. And you notice this cone and the track has continued to shift even since this morning at the 11 a.m. update. That was the last time they updated the track. This did shift just a little bit farther to the west. So we're looking at a potential landfall near the Fort Myers area, although this is always subject to change. This is just a forecast. That's why we show you that whole cone, because there is plenty of room for error still at this point. The storm will weaken gradually as it moves through the Tampa Bay area, but If it moves on shore near the Fort Myers area as a Category 4, you notice Monday at 8 a.m. when it's moving out of our area, it's...
And welcome back to our continuing coverage of Hurricane Irma. I'm coming to you from Fort Myers, Florida. If you've been watching over the last couple hours, you know that we've been talking about people who days ago were in Miami or Miami Beach, faced with the idea of where to evacuate to, and they chose to move west, often to Tampa, because they thought that would be safer. Now today they woke up to a very different reality with the storm having moved to the west. Now Tampa in the line of this storm as it moves up northward here to Naples, Fort Myers, then as far as Tampa, probably getting hurricane force winds in Tampa by Sunday night around 8 o'clock, according to the latest. Bryn Gingras is on I-4, I think I-4 East, just getting a sense of the traffic coming out of Tampa. What are you seeing there? And is it people who have decided to try to leave Tampa and head to points east to Orlando or elsewhere, or even back to Miami?
Oh yeah, Anderson. We saw people that are trying to head east up to Daytona Beach. We saw or talked to someone who actually said he just wants to be out of Florida completely. He wants to go all the way back to New York City. Now we're along I-4 East, as you said, Anderson, and the traffic is at pretty much a slow crawl right now. There are times we have seen it that it has been bumper to bumper. It's bumper to bumper further up as you get closer to Orlando. We're about 25 miles outside of Orlando right now, but it has been like this for the past 2 or 3 hours. Me and my crew, we actually drove it for the past 2 hours, stopping at different rest points along the way, talking to people, because those rest stops are all full of people with their pets, giving their pets some relief, also just picking up on some last minute items like water and food. They are packed and also of course, fueling up. This is what it has been like at times. People so frustrated that they had to drive on the shoulder just to get to some point where they're actually moving. We also saw some emergency vehicles on that shoulder as well, several of them, giving us the thought that maybe there was some evacuations at some point. But yeah, the other thing, Anderson, you talk about the people that were seeking relief in the Tampa area and then coming back this way. We certainly saw that in Orlando. We talked to a lot of people who were staying in the same hotel as us, quite frankly, and they were evacuated from the east, so they moved west to Orlando and then heard that their area was no longer under an evacuation order, decided to pack up and quickly get back to their homes east before the storm hits, and they wouldn't be able to travel. So there's a lot of variables that are going on as people watch this storm closely. One thing I want to point out to you, Anderson, though, is as all these cars are leaving the area of concern, that Tampa, Fort Myers, Naples area, we just saw about 5 or 6 National Guard vehicles heading in that direction. Anderson?
Yeah, it's going to be needed, no doubt about it, looking at the sizes. And for those folks who are on the highway, if there's any good news at all, is that this storm is pretty slow moving, which at least for those who have already left gives them time. Traffic is pretty slow. We'll continue to check in, see how the highways are on that road and others. I want to go to Allison Chinchar, who's standing by, just monitoring the tracking of this. Let's just get a sense of the latest, Allison.
That's right. So the big shift that we've seen is now we're starting to see that turn to the north and make its way to Florida. In doing that, however, it now means the eye of the storm is back out over open water, and very warm open water at that. That is what's going to allow this storm to re-intensify over the coming hours. The official forecast from the National Hurricane Center does take that track back up to a Category 4 strength, directly over the Florida Keys. Then it continues up the west coast. We're talking Naples, Fort Myers, then into Tampa, where it will weaken pretty quickly. But again, the big question for a lot of people has been, why is it going to take such a sharp turn to the right? Why not just go back out over the open Gulf? So here's why. The past couple of days, what's been steering the storm is this high pressure right here in the Atlantic. Now, as it edges closer to Florida, it's now going to start to interact with the high pressure just off the coast of Texas. That's essentially blocking it from going too far into the Gulf. Then, as it goes north, it's going to interact with this portion of air, but that's going to retreat, allowing the storm to be able to push pretty far inland, maybe as far as, say, Tennessee, even into Kentucky. So that's going to be the concern. Now, the major concerns going forward are going to be storm surge. We're talking 5 to 10 feet south of Miami through Key West, 10 to 15 feet from Naples down towards Key Largo, even Tampa, looking at 5 to 8 feet of storm surge. And then we started to see even some of that creep into portions of Georgia and South Carolina with 4 to 6 feet of storm surge. Winds also going to be a huge factor. Take a look at some of these numbers for maximum wind gusts. 134 miles per hour in Fort Myers, 135 in Key West, even Orlando, which is pretty far inland, looking at nearly 75 miles per hour for those peak wind gusts. And rainfall, guys. Anderson, this is also going to be the key thing to note. Storm surge is huge, but you also have to keep in mind as that water comes inland, you also have the water coming down as well. And we could be looking at widespread 6 to 10 inches of rain. And then some heavier pockets that could be 15 plus inches. On top of the storm surge that comes in. So again, the main thing, folks, when it starts to come in, don't get out on the roads. Don't get in that water, because the storm surge alone is enough to trap your car, let alone any flash flooding that could occur,
So by Monday morning, we're becoming less likely to see those in our southern areas as the storm moves to the north. So Monday at noon, we could still have some hurricane force gusts around in places like Tampa up through Inverness, but the winds will be easing up as we head closer towards Northport and our southern counties.
But following that graphic, Julie, on those lines, what you're seeing here with that counterclockwise rotation around the center, those winds are starting to come west and northwest, and those are the areas that are vulnerable along coastal areas in the bay itself, and that's where we really have to watch the high tides. We were looking at the storm surge inundation map from the National Hurricane Center, which is a great guideline, and you can find it if you go to their nhc.noaa.gov site, and actually see up and down the coast where the potential inundation for storm surge would be. So we're talking 3 to 6 feet, perhaps 9 feet more in some areas, direction for all of that. So if you're in those evacuation zones, as we've been hearing, listen to the local officials, listen to the local EOCs.
And we actually are getting reports, if you have been asked to evacuate in places like Sarasota County, there is a new shelter open there now at Riverview High School. That's in Sarasota County. Again, there is a Riverview in Hillsborough County, but this is Riverview High School in Sarasota County. So this is a new shelter that's opening. If you're in need of shelter, if you're in need of evacuating in your area in Sarasota, that has just been opened there now. We can show you video. Want to bring that and, some people are in need of places to go. So open up your homes to family, friends. If you're in a non-flood zone, invite them over so they don't have to head too far. And, you know, if you don't have a friend or family to stay with, now we do have a new shelter opening in Sarasota County.
Many people might be new to town. They don't really know anybody around the area.
Hurricane Irma has taken that turn to the northwest, which means the winds and rains we're feeling now will continue until tomorrow and maybe double. And that's just here on the west coast of Florida. It could be even worse, and the storm surge there is the major concern. 10 to 15 feet of storm surge in some places. I want to go to Punta Gorda on the west coast of Florida right now. We have storm chaser Ben McMillan there. And Ben, we can see in your shot the water behind you there. If you have a storm surge on the west coast, which in some places would be 10 to 15 feet, what does that mean?
Yeah, good evening, John. We're on the Peace River outside of Punta Gorda. We already are getting 3 to 5 foot high waves battering the coast here. And we're still 24 hours away from the worst impact in this part of Florida. So it's just going to go downhill as these waves and these winds increase in size and intensity.
Yeah, that's not a good sign if this is happening already. It will get much worse tomorrow throughout the night and then throughout the day. You know, Ben, you've watched a lot of storms, followed a lot of storms. What's unique about Irma?
The fact that Irma is so slow moving and is going to hug the coast is one of my biggest concerns at this point. A lot of times hurricanes come inland in one small area and move on and then weaken. However, she's going to stay out longer over the sea and potentially affect millions of population along the western Florida coast, which could prolong the dangerous conditions.
You know, and Ben, if people have been watching, they've heard you say that one of your concerns is if Irma hits where you fear it might, it could leave parts of Florida looking like a third world country. What do you mean by that?
Well, John, we're looking at major hurricane status, which is winds well over 100 miles an hour, 110 miles an hour to be exact. And that major hurricane status is supposed to be maintained not just through Naples, not through Fort Myers, but up through Tampa and even points north. A lot of folks they experienced the harshest conditions of this storm throughout the day on Sunday.
And again, we've heard Florida officials, including Governor Rick Scott, saying, look, we can replace your house, we can replace your belongings, but we can't replace lives. Hopefully, the preparations are what they should be. We've seen a lot of people move in a hurry on the West Coast right now. What have you seen in terms of the evacuations and the preparations where you are, Ben?
John, Punta Gorda is only 6 feet above sea level, so folks in this area definitely need to get out because storm surge of 10 to 15 feet will overtake this area if it comes into it. And a lot of folks don't really even act like there's a concern. We've seen several people, several locals just doing their daily business. We urge them to leave and do it soon.
And McMillan is saying more important points to make. Look, this isn't about scaring people. This is about warning people of what is to come. And the forecasts are very clear. A 10 to 15 foot storm surge there. So we hope people are paying attention, getting to safety while there is still time. Ben McMillan, our thanks to you and Punta Gorda. Please stay safe. I want to go up the peninsula now of Florida to Gainesville. So many people have moved north in this state. We're going to a shelter in Gainesville. We're seeing as Kaylee Hartung is. And Kaylee, this is a shelter catering to seniors and people with special needs.
It is, John, and Jim Polk here, one of the many who's made that choice to come here. Jim, you got a phone call last night that made the decision for you to come to this shelter today. Tell me about that phone call.
Well, my oxygen company called me and advised me to go to a shelter because they wouldn't be able to take care of me after yesterday, well, after today.
So what can this shelter do for you? What services does it provide when it comes to your oxygen and the need for it that you're afraid you wouldn't be able to get it home?
The loss of power was my problem, and we obviously have power here. So that's about 100% of the solution.
You've lived in Florida for a long time. You tell me 40 years on and off. Have you ever been in a situation like this one?
I had to evacuate to a center. I've been through several hurricanes, but not of this magnitude.
How are the emotions of this one different?
It's a much bigger storm than usual. I feel like it's going to do a lot of damage to this part of the country.
Do you think that folks here in Gainesville recognize the threat that's here? We hear our reporters from CNN down in Miami or over in Tampa talking about the storm surge, and all of the damage that could come as a result of that. But here in Gainesville, we're pretty far inland.
It's going to be primarily wind damage, but 100-mile-an-hour wind can do a lot of damage. And it'll take down power lines, and it'll be quite a while before power is restored.
The FEMA chief now saying millions could be without power in Florida for weeks, possibly. Now that you're here, how long are you prepared to stay here?
As long as it takes to get power back on.
What did you pack with you to bring here?
I packed like I was going camping.
So what's in that bag of yours underneath this cot?
Everything. A few snacks, a lot of clothing, bedding, medicines, and, just miscellaneous other things.
Now, this is as far as our cameras can get inside this shelter for the privacy of other people here. We really appreciate you talking to us. But for folks who can't see what's going on around us, how do you describe the setup that's here and the care you feel is being given to you all?
I think they're doing a great job for the situation they're in. They may be in a learning process as well as everybody around, but they're doing well.
Well, thank you so much, Jim. Good luck to you.
Well, thank you.
John, this facility at capacity, more than 100 folks here in need of care.
Kaylee Hartung for us in Gainesville, Florida. Please give our best to Jim right there. These are hard decisions to go to the shelters, and it is hard once you are there. This is not easy to get through, and people need strength over the next few days. So, Kaylee, thanks so much for that. Look, one of the furthest things from people's mind right now, games, but, the sports teams around this state, sports are big here in Florida, have had to make some very major decisions. So many games in pro and college sports canceled for this weekend. Much more of CNN's special live coverage right after this.
Let's just get a sense of the latest health.
That's right. So the big shift that we've seen is now we're starting to see that turn to the north and make its way to Florida. In doing that, however, it now means the eye of the storm is back out over open water, and very warm open water at that. That is what's going to allow this storm to re-intensify over the coming hours. The official forecast from the National Hurricane Center does take, then it continues up the west coast. We're talking Myers, then it will weaken pretty quickly. But again, the big question for a lot of people has been, why is it going to take such a sharp turn to the right? Why not just go back out over the open Gulf? So here's why. The past couple of days, what's been steering the storm is this high pressure right here in the Atlantic. Now as it edges closer to Florida, it's now going to start to interact with the high pressure just off the coast of Texas. Texas. That's essentially blocking it from going too far into the Gulf. Then as it goes north, it's going to interact with this portion of air, but that's going to retreat, allowing the storm to be able to push pretty far inland, maybe as far as, say, Tennessee, even into Kentucky. So that's going to be the concern. Now, the major concerns going forward are going to be storm surge. We're talking 5 to 10 feet south of Miami through Key West, 10 to 15 feet from Naples down towards Key Largo, even Tampa, looking at 5 to 8 feet of storm surge. And then we started to see even some of that creep into portions of Georgia and South Carolina with 4 to 6 feet of storm surge. Winds also going to be a huge factor. Take a look at some of these numbers. For maximum wind gusts, 134 miles per hour in Fort Myers, 135 in Key West, even Orlando, which is pretty far inland, looking at nearly 75 miles per hour for those peak wind gusts and rainfall, guys. Anderson, this is also going to be the key thing to note. Storm surge is huge, but you also have to keep in mind, as that water comes inland, you also have the water coming down as well. And we could be looking at widespread 6 to 10 inches of rain, and then some heavier pockets that could be 15 plus inches on top of the storm surge that comes in. So again, the main thing, folks, when it starts to come in, don't get out on the roads. Don't get in that water, because the storm surge alone is enough to trap your car, let alone any flash flooding that could incur as well at the same time.
Yeah, so many things to think about depending on where you want to get to. Allison, appreciate it.
We've seen overnight, because a lot of people went to sleep and it was a category 5 and it was moving toward the West Coast. We've seen some changes overnight. Chad, get us all up to date.
Victor, the storm made contact with Cuba overnight, and that's the biggest change to anything here. The new models coming out later this morning will have to deal with a Category 4, but only 130 miles per hour compared to 155, which was the number at 5 o'clock this morning. So things have really improved for the U.S. They have not improved for Cuba. The northern coast of Cuba getting pounded by this storm. Also, the Cuban Keys right through here, and our Patrick Ottman, which
a buoy, which gives you just a sense of some of the wave action that we are beginning to see as the water level starts to rise. They're nowhere near as much as it will be, waves as the wind picks up, larger and larger waves. You see some of the tree action there, but again, this is just a taste of what is to come in Key West. I want to go on the phone to a guy named JD who owns a bar down in Key West. JD, I understand you closed your bar because of the storm, but you didn't choose to evacuate. What kind of preparations are you making right now?
Well, I actually put up the shutters at my home and tied up the boat, got everything out of the yard, and my house is now loaded with everything from outside. But then I was getting riled up by everybody for staying, so I thought maybe it would be best to find a room. And here I am at the Marriott beach side.
So how high are you off the ground? Is it multi-stories?
Well, actually, I have a ringside seat. I am on the 3rd floor with a spiral staircase going up to the rooftop if I was that brave.
Well, it's probably good to just have that as an option. And that's great that you're on the 3rd floor, because obviously, any kind of storm surge that hopefully would put you out of the wave. And of course, with winds and waves on top of that, there's no telling what things are going to be like. I assume, you've ridden out storms before, have you?
Yes, I have a couple, but nothing like this. And this now is rated, I think, only a Category 3, but that could change. And the buildings here are rated Category 5. So we have other people staying here from Key West, including some of the military, some of the police, some officials, and other people from the town that chose to not leave. So it was a very wise choice to be here. And the room has an ocean view, so I mean, I can see everything. Sailboats out, anchored in the harbor.
Assume you have some food, you have some supplies to last for a couple of days. Any regret about not leaving the Keys?
No, actually, it's kind of like an exciting vacation. A little more exciting than what I'd like, but an exciting vacation nonetheless. And I did bring some food with me and some wine, so I'm all set. And I also brought the cat. The cat did not want to stay home.
Glad you have company, and we'll check in with you when this thing is done. We wish you the best, and obviously everybody in the Keys. I want to check in with Tom Sater, who's following the track of this storm. You guys, Tom, I mean, you hear folks in the Florida Keys who've decided not to evacuate despite the constant warnings, despite the constant pressure from authorities. Just talk about where this storm is now, what the Keys should be seeing, and when.
I have a tornado warning for Key West. This is one of few that we've had today. There will be many. In fact, it's not unusual to have 50, 60, 70, 75 to 80 tornado warnings. I know Harvey had over 200. But again, tornadoes are going to be an issue. I know for many, when they're looking at, of course, IRMA making its way toward southwestern Florida, Miami, Hollywood, Boca, Delray Beach may think, okay, we're not going to see the strongest winds, but you're in an area where you could have a higher concentration of tornadoes. Now, again, as we continue to watch this, Sanderson, make its way off the coast, I'm going to show you a radar in a minute. Very interesting now to continue to watch the eye. We're already seeing on the infrared satellite imagery more purple. That's the higher cloud tops, colder cloud tops. So it's starting to generate some energy. But I think we may be going through one of those eye wall replacement cycles. More than when almost the entire state of Florida under a hurricane warning. Watches to the north will change in due time as the storm progresses northward. We've talked tirelessly about the storm surge, of course, getting quite great. Now, you have to understand where you see the area of purple of 10 to 15 feet. Initially, that's wetlands. That's the Everglades. There's barely any roads there until you get up to around Alligator Alley. But it does extend all the way through the Carolinas, and that will continue to be the case. Now, here's the eye. We've got a secondary banding in yellow that is starting to occur. We typically see that when that outer band starts to form, and then it shrinks in toward the center, and it gains strength. It's a little close to the shoreline right now, but I think that's going to happen. Now, consider this. We've talked tirelessly about as well. We've got 90 miles here from Cuba to the coast of Florida to develop. The 90 miles. You have to consider the curvature and its western track and then to the north. So instead of 90 miles of extremely warm water, we've got 120, 125 miles. So that will intensify over time with this water temperatures being at 85 or 90. Tornado watch now of Florida as time progresses, and what to expect. Millions of people up in Georgia, South Carolina, see that got an interest. Anderson in just a little bit.
Yeah, and with all that warm water, of course, the strength of the storm probably increasing. Tom, as we go to break, though, I want you to look at some time lapse. Patrick Ottman has been taking Cuba of what he has seen of this storm. Gives you a sense of what's here in Florida.
That's right. So one of the things that has just changed.
Hey, that's strong. Yeah. Woo! It is just this Category 5 section of Cuba. Just now we're kind of feeling the wind pick up again. Where we are, the power was knocked out some 3 or 4 hours ago. I don't think we'll get it back. All day long we were watching the weather get worse and worse and worse. And this afternoon, a couple really strong bands came through out of nowhere and really almost knocked us off our line has now come to us, and the town where we've been reporting from is now underwater, probably a good 3 to 4 feet of water. Irma is heading towards Florida, but she is not done with Cuba just yet. We continue to feel strong gusts. The roof's been torn off. There are trees that have been down. The area that I am in, this was not underwater yesterday. It very much so is today. Many of the people live here in small one-story houses, which are now just underwater. No! The storm is leaving, but it's not gone.
Where is the forward movement, the direction in which the storm is moving? Right now, we're starting to see it change from due west to west-northwest. That may seem very subtle, but that's what we've been waiting for. We've been waiting for that shift in which it is going to start to make that northward trek towards the state of Florida. And we're starting to at least get a little bit of a glimpse of that. Again, it's not a sharp turn, at least as of this point, but we're starting to see that change over. Now, one of the main concerns with this storm is still going to be incredibly strong winds. At landfall point, for a lot of these areas, these are your maximum wind gusts you're going to be dealing. 138 miles per hour in Key West, 136 in Fort Myers. Even Tampa going to be looking at 116 miles per hour at its strongest point for the storm. The track still does take it along the west coast, but it's likely going to make its first landfall, if you will, in the U.S. over the Florida Keys. Exactly where, that is still yet to be determined. We have to wait to find out how quickly the storm makes that sharp turn to the north to really be able to tell exactly where the storm is going to go. It's then likely to go along places like Naples, Fort Myers, into Tampa, and then eventually it will move all inland and then push towards the states like Georgia, Alabama, and into Tennessee. One of the key things that we expect for this storm is that it will re-intensify back to a Category 4 storm. The main reason for that, take a look at how warm the water is in this region, upper 80s. That is the perfect fuel for a storm like this to be able to intensify. And that's what we expect it to do before it finally makes landfall. Now, we've been hearing a lot of this. People want to know, what is the timing for a lot of these cities in Florida? So let's take a look at Tampa. Tropicals will have already arrived in some of these areas by tomorrow afternoon. Hurricane force winds will likely already be in Tampa by tomorrow evening. Rainfall could be looking at 6 to 8 inches of rain and the storm surge around 5 to 8 feet. Now we move to Naples, a little bit farther south of Tampa. Tropical storm winds will arrive early tomorrow morning. Hurricane force winds could arrive, say, just shortly after sunrise on Sunday. Then we talk about rainfall. This is where we could be looking at really heavy amounts of rain. We're talking nearing a foot of rain, and some of the areas just outside of Naples could pick up, say, as much as 15 inches of rain. Storm surge is also going to be a big factor, 10 to 15 feet for this region. Here's a look at the radar going forward to show you not just the direction, but also where those heavy rain bands are going to be. Again, on Sunday, we expect it early morning to cross over the Keys, then continue its trek up the west coast. We're talking Naples, Fort Myers, into Tampa, then pushing up towards Jacksonville and into the state of Georgia. It's still going to take incredibly strong winds into places like South Carolina and Georgia, which is why those states also have tropical storm watches. Even though we expect the storm to actually weaken a bit before it makes it into those areas, it's not going to weaken entirely. They are still going to get some impacts. Miami is already starting to see some of those impacts as we speak, and hurricane force winds, guys, will be arriving as early as tomorrow morning.
We've seen overnight, because a lot of people went to sleep for 5 and it was moving toward the some changes overnight. Chad, get us all.
After the storm made contact with Cuba overnight, and that's the biggest change to anything here. The new models coming out later this morning will have to deal with a Category 4, only 130 miles. Which was the number.
All right, hello there, John Berman here in Miami. This is Hurricane Irma. It has taken that northwestern turn, and we are now feeling the strongest rain we have yet. That's here in Miami. We've consistently been feeling winds north of 30 miles an hour or so, and this is what we can expect to more or less continue throughout tomorrow as this storm really heads all the way up the Florida Peninsula. Of particular concern right now, the west coast of Florida, where I am right now, as bad as it is and as bad as it might get, might not be as bad as it is in places like Naples and Fort Myers along the coast, where they're expecting a storm surge of 10 to 15 feet, which is a very big storm surge for those low-lying areas in the bays all the way up the west coast. So we are watching this storm very closely all over the state of Florida. We have some new information on the fourth. When expect landfall in the Florida Keys and here on the peninsula. Let's go to Tom Sater at the CNN Weather Center. Tom.
Yep. John, we continue to watch the storm center now, making its way away from the coast of Cuba. We knew it would make its way here, and all week long, since actually last weekend, we were saying until the storm reaches Cuba and turns northward, we just do not know for sure where landfall will be. The computer models, we pushed into them and rely on them, and they have been fluctuating earlier this week to the east and now more of a push to the west. And we're going to continue to watch that because the steering currents mean everything, but this is such a monster storm, it really doesn't mean anybody's going to miss out on this. So we are watching the development. The pressure is dropping. Most likely we're going to see an increase in the winds because it takes a while for the winds to catch up to that pressure drop. In fact, 125 miles per hour, I wouldn't be surprised to see it up to 130. That'll kick it back up to Category 4 status, and we could even see it grow a little bit more. We've got a lot of land, our water to work with. It's not just 90 miles. If you talk about the curvature over toward Fort Myers, that's about 125 miles. So it's got time, it's got fuel, and it still has its spin and intensity. We had a few models that wanted to drape it down into the higher terrain of Cuba. That would have torn the system down a little bit. But really, for the models to be even in central Cuba or staying off, it's been running pretty much mediocre right through these models. We have a tornado watch now for the entire southern half of Florida. That will continue to move northward in time as the storm approaches. We've had a few warnings. We've got a warning right now in Key West for a tornado. So that means it's either Doppler indicated or visually indicated. So again, on the ground, as the bands continue to move in, the wind gusts will increase. There will be times of a complete downpour activity and then a couple of quiet times. But we are going to see a gentle increase in the winds. The forecast, which shows the spin and the rainfall, bright red are your heavy downpours. And again, our storm surge is going to be significant, mainly first in the Everglades. Of course, Miami, we're watching them closely, but the real and significant increase of the storm surge in the Everglades. And that's good news. It's wetlands. They can have that. But as it continues to march northward, we'll see more of a tornado outbreak possibility on the East Coast. We'll have the surge, of course, continuing up the East Coast. On the West Coast, winds will be out of the north somewhat, northeasterly. They will wrap around. Tampa is going to have a problem. Not so much, of course, well, yes, when the storm moves through. But don't let your guard down in Tampa Bay, because most likely on the back edge of this, we're going to find winds coming in from the northwest and due west. So that'll shove the, of course, storm surge and those walls of water back into Tampa Bay, which could be just as bad, if not worse. I want to go a little bit further out, though, and talk about those in Georgia, South Carolina, into Alabama, in Tennessee. As you see, the track has been curving, and we've been watching this. Let me show you what some of the models look like, of course, after we talk about the winds, because I want everybody to know, if you haven't been in the Southeast, you see the core of the winds move up through Florida, hugging that west coast, moving northward. What you see in purple here are wind gusts in excess of 60, maybe per hour. This area of the southeastern U.S. is pine country, which means hardy pines, weak root systems, but very high. I mean, they're massive. They fall in isolated thunderstorms, knock out power, damage trees. we could easily see tens and tens of thousands of trees destroyed through Florida and through the southeast. But now, John, watch what happens to these models. They move up with the force of wind. We carry it into northern, oh, we missed it, into northern Alabama. I'll show it to you later. It's starts. There may be a loss of steering current. Means heavy fall will break that more, of course, in the coming out